absolute beings who had created countless universes since time immemorial in search of infinity. These beings possessed a power beyond any limits of imagination, and their desire for knowledge was inexhaustible. The absolute being kept on creating more and more creations, and so laws, souls, and various matter were born. But nothing could dispel the boredom of the absolute. He began to watch the warfare of the creatures he created, studying their conflicts and intrigues. In every battle, in every clash, he sought answers to the questions that had troubled his mind since he began to create universes. He was also interested in the destructive power of these creatures. The creatures had to fight, die, and be reborn again in an endless war, and it was all to amuse their creator. This was the case until the unforeseen happened. An absolute being watching the battle was destroyed by his own creation. Absolute beings from other dimensions, upon learning of this, gathered together, turning their gaze to the world that had lost its creator. The death of their kind by a creature born of his hands was a dark omen. In these shadows, echoes of past evil lie the true power of created beings. However, this fact did not excite the absolute beings. They only had one thought: the power that lost its owner would belong to the one who would be the first to take it away. The young boy, Suho, said that he had been accepted into the Korean National Institute of Arts. He still couldn't believe it. His friends couldn't believe that he was telling them the truth. They thought it couldn't be. Their facial expressions changed a lot. They didn't want to believe it. They doubted that such a rude person could pass the Art Institute entrance exam. One of them cried and said that he should have retaken the exam. Suho laughed with them and said that he finally had freedom from this hell. But suddenly he heard someone behind his back congratulate him on passing the entrance exam and asked if he got into the Art Institute. He turned around to see who it was. Suho saw that it was Kim Song-chol, who approached him again. Kim Song-chol said that he didn't think he had a talent for it. He was wondering, since when did he become good at drawing? But the guy got mad at him. He told him that his name wasn't Kim Song-chol, but Lee Un-chol. But Suho didn't care that he was mad at him. He pretended that he didn't mix up his name on purpose. He said that thanks to Suho, his plan to go to a high school failed. Suho replied that thanks to him, he was able to graduate. The other students noticed that Un-chol was provoking him again. They realized that it wouldn't be long before they would have graduation, yet he continued to act like a child, ignoring the maturity and responsibility that was already required of him at this important moment. The students couldn't understand why Yun-chol was picking on a man who was trying his best to live a happy life after his parents disappeared. Lee Yun-chol wanted to hit him. He shouted his name loudly and started to attack him, but Suho stood still. He was completely calm and sure he could repel his attack. Suho reacted incredibly fast to his attack, striking him back, which made Lee Yun-chol fall to the floor. Leaving, Suho told him to be quiet until graduation. But suddenly, Lee Yun-chol stood up, determined and ready to continue the fight. His eyes blazed with determination, and he made it clear that he had not given up yet despite the difficulties. He told Suho that he was not hurt at all. His hand was covered with an unknown energy that Suho saw for the first time. This power seemed mysterious and unfamiliar to him. Lee Un-chol unleashed an incredibly powerful attack that Suho was miraculously able to dodge thanks to his reflexes. His face reflected fear and surprise, while the other disciples were also shocked by Lee Un-chol's strength. The force of his punch was tremendous. It pierced through the nearby iron lockers. Suho, who was lying on the floor, was in a complete daze and couldn't do anything, completely paralyzed from terror and shock. Lee Un-chol's entire body was shrouded in a brightly glowing aura that emanated from him with incredible power. He looked truly formidable and powerful, capable of crushing any obstacle in his way. 2 years had passed since that incident. Suho was already a second-year university student, walking down the street, immersed in his thoughts. He often remembered that day. He heard a man telling the passersby that all the classes in the main building had been moved to the neighboring building and asked all the students to go there. Suho thought that the hunters were currently conducting a gate sweep and noticed the guards telling everyone to stay away from the danger zone. One of them asked how long it had been since the hunters had arrived. The staff member replied that it had been a little over an hour. Considering the gate was rated as D-ranked, they should have arrived soon. Suho heard an announcement stating that only hunters could approach the gate. He thought that there was a new gate again, must given the increased precautions and strict restriction on access. He remembered that 3 years ago, strange gates had started appearing all over the world, and since then, things had changed. Their former world no longer existed. The gates worked as doors leading to a dungeon, from which demonic beasts would emerge after a time, destroying everything in their path. But at the same time, with these changes occurred in the people themselves. There were people able to control magical energy. Such people were called awakened. In their rapidly changing world, the chaos, which felt like it should have lasted for a long time, ended much sooner. An awakened man named Wu Jinchul created an association of hunters, gathering all his kind together and founded the specialty of hunters. Thus, now all people were divided into two groups. There were the awakened, and there were the ordinary people who couldn't awaken. While some had to break through obstacles like ants, others had it fall straight from the sky into their hands. In this system, the ants were clearly aware of their boundaries. Suho realized that no matter how hard an ordinary person tried, he was no match for even an awakened E-rank hunter. But if the hunter didn't close the gate, this world would be destroyed. In other words, people couldn't survive without the awakened ones. But the hunters could manage without the ordinary people. Suho was grateful to the hunters for this, that the unawakened, like him, could live peacefully. And yet he felt anxious whether he could get used to what he couldn't have. It all started from his parents missing, to depending on others for his right to survive. It all went against what he once could have gotten. He lost what he had, and the resulting void was filled with helplessness. He remembered that his mother often told him that he had taken after his father. He wondered how his father would have acted in his situation. Suddenly, he heard someone calling him. His memories were interrupted by his teacher, who came up to him to tell him that he had had pretty good concentration today. He looked at his drawing and asked if it was interesting to draw like that. Suho replied that he just did it without thinking, to which the teacher replied that his ant was quite ingenious for an insect. But looking closer, he said that it was not just an ant, but a human ant. Suho looked at his painting and could not understand why he had drawn it in the first place. All of the staff who were fencing the gate saw that the hunters were coming back, and everyone had to get ready to meet them. The people gathered around the gate noticed that the atmosphere around them was relaxed, which meant that their raid was a success. One of the staff members thanked Hunter Kim Jong-soo for their work, to which he replied that the dungeon had been successfully cleared, and he had information to pass on to the association. He said that they had found a new species of demonic beasts. They were humanoid-like creatures that spewed blue flames from their eyes and mouths. They used claws and fangs, but their killing power was low. The hunter said that he was a little hurt, but since no complications had been revealed, they were just harmless monsters. And yet, they definitely hadn't met such demonic beasts before, so he was glad that they weren't dangerous. When he told them about the new beasts, the staff asked him to detail everything in the association report. Suddenly, blue flames appeared from the hunter's wound, and the hunter felt a sharp pain. He let go of his sword and hands. It was as if an unknown force enveloped him. He lowered his head and froze. The staff member noticed that his eyes were sparkling with blue flames. He called out to him, but there was no response from him. Before the employee could speak, the hunter turned around and attacked him. He was under the power of the blue flame and could not resist it. It destroyed the employee standing next to him. The hunters who were walking behind him were shocked that their leader had destroyed a man who posed no threat to him. They realized that the flames in this dungeon were not ordinary. It had infected the hunter, after which he could infect anyone he would bite. The people panicked and began to retreat from the gate, terrified that the hunter had just destroyed a human. They feared that he might turn against them and quickly searched for a safe place. An unexpected noise outside interrupted the drawing class, and the students went to the windows to see why people were shouting. Suho raised his head and couldn't understand what was happening there. Looking through the window, the students couldn't understand why people started attacking each other. They were all enveloped in a blue flame that was driving them crazy. They noticed that their eyes were glowing blue, which meant that it was definitely demonic energy. They thought that the dungeon had not been cleaned up. The people outside didn't know what to do. Some were trying to find a safe place and stay away from the blue flame-possessed people. Others were shouting that they should have waited for the hunters who could save them. One of the students told Professor Talim that he was also an awakened one and asked him to do something, to which the professor replied that he couldn't help. He was only an E-rank hunter. Suho noticed that one of the hunters, engulfed in blue flames, was heading straight toward them. He managed to warn everyone to run away from the windows quickly and find a safe place. After his words, The hunter's body burst into the classroom window and began to destroy all the people present in the classroom. Suho turned around and began to run away, shouting for everyone else to do the same. Suho, while running away, noticed that one student was lying on the floor, crying in pain. She couldn't escape from the classroom. Her legs were injured. She was begging to be helped, to get out and escape. He didn't know what to do or how he would be able to help the girl. He turned around and rushed to run further. He shouted to her that he ran for help and would definitely come back for her, but already with the hunters. Suho ran and could not understand who he could call for help. He thought that he had left the girl to her doom, but he realized that as an unawakened man, he could only do one thing. He closed his eyes and thought that it was all because of that stupid awakening, but if he only blamed the situation, nothing would change. He realized that it was up to him to find a way out of the situation. Suho closed his eyes and thought about what his father would have done in his place. He turned around and saw the possessed hunter already approaching the girl. The girl was screaming and calling for help, but there was no one around her. She saw that she was being attacked by the hunter. She covered her face with her hands and started screaming loudly. Suho came to her rescue, and with the help of a fire extinguisher, he was able to repel the hunter, saving her from imminent death. Suho knew that in his place, his father would have done the same thing. He would not leave the girl in trouble and would have saved her. Then Suho received a notice that he had fulfilled all the conditions of the secret quest, Courage of the Powerless. He remembered that once he had a dream. He remembered it clearly, as if it was really happening to him. Suho thought that in this dream, it was as if he was in some game where he had power attack gloves in which he fought against monsters. In order to defeat the monsters that were getting stronger each time, Suho had to find new ways and methods to be able to resist these increasing threats. To prevent the monsters from killing him, he raised his level as much as possible and fought endlessly with the monsters. With each new destruction, his level increased, and he became stronger and stronger. Suho realized that the stronger the monsters became, the stronger he became. Soon, he came across only powerful monsters. He used all his skills and all his weapons to fight the strong monsters. Time passed, and he managed to get to the last level where the strongest monster was waiting for him to fight. Suho remembered that the boss he met there was very strong. Although he was his enemy, his power caused him respect and even envy. Yet, for some reason, the boss was a character he wanted to wake up to. He couldn't and didn't want to fight him, and he couldn't wake up either. The main boss in the last level was his father. When he saw him, he realized that he would not be able to destroy him. He thought that maybe he was just a projection of his dream, his strong and unflappable father. He wondered how his father had gained such strength. Suho took the fire extinguisher to save the girl from the mad hunter. He kept thinking about his father. He wondered what he would do in such a situation. He ran at the monster and thought that if his father were in this abnormal situation, how would he deal with the hunter who wanted to destroy them? The hunter's entire body was engulfed in a blue flame that completely took over him. He went mad and started to infect other people, turning them into similar monsters. Suho fought the hunter as best he could. He hit him with a fire extinguisher, preventing him from biting everyone in the class. He was sure that his father would have done the same thing, sacrificing himself to save an innocent person, so he decided to do the same. He managed to fend off the attack of an incredibly strong hunter. He realized they should find a safe place, but he knew it wouldn't last long and didn't know what to do next. He had heard that the unawakened couldn't hurt monsters without magic. Suho realized he had been too reckless in running to save the girl. He hadn't thought of the consequences, and now his life was in danger. He had no magic and wouldn't be able to stop the monster. He noticed something strange. The monster didn't fall down. It was like it was suspended in the air. Suho couldn't understand what kind of magic it was or who possessed such power. He looked at the girl, who also froze and didn't move. Everything around him froze. He couldn't understand what was happening. He received a notice that had not been opened yet. He was shocked that time had stopped around him. His thoughts were racing through his head, one after another. He opened the notification and read that he had successfully completed the secret quest, The Courage of a Weakling, and the system was offering him the chance to become a player. Suddenly, he realized this was just like his dream, where he had to fight his father in the final battle. He thought that if this was really like his dream, he couldn't refuse such an offer to become a player. Suho smiled and confirmed that he would like to become a player. Now, his life would change. He didn't know what was ahead of him, but he was ready to accept the change. The system congratulated him for becoming a player. He was rewarded for completing the task. The mage Candiaru granted him a powerful spell, and from now on he would always be in good health. He also received the enhancement of long life without disease. He was immune to all diseases, poisons, and other negative effects. The system warned him that this was not a dream, and to be careful, he only had one life. Looking at his stats, Suho thought the window was just like in the game, just like in his dream, and he was happy about that. The system notified him that he had a new mission. He needed to destroy the fog burn and increase his level. Burn of Mist was an awakened hunter who had been infected by the blue flame after a failed attempt to clear the gate. Suho, after receiving all the notifications, noticed that time had unfrozen. He looked at the girl and told her to run away from there soon. Now, he could see all the inscriptions above the heads of the hunters. They were all mist burns that he needed to destroy. They were simple, unawakened people. He saw 2 unawakened demonic beings and 1 hunter in front of him. He realized that he needed to defeat them to level up. Suho saw 2 fog burns running at him, ready to destroy him. The surviving humans were fleeing to safety. He stood calmly and waited for them to approach. He knew that if he was truly awakened, he now possessed magic capable of destroying the monsters. So he decided to test it. Suho took the fire extinguisher and hit the first monster that tried to attack him. This blow knocked the monster back a few meters. He threw the fire extinguisher away and decided to test the power of his punch. He swung and aimed his fist straight at the monster's head. Suho was incredibly focused and angry. He gathered all his strength and shouted for the monster to feel the full force of his attack. His determination and rage were palpable, and for the first time, he was not afraid of them. The power of his strike increased several times. Now he was no longer an ordinary, unawakened man. He struck the monster and it pierced the ceiling with him. Suho couldn't believe he had such power. He was easily able to defeat the monster who had previously been able to destroy him with a single blow. The system notified him that he was able to defeat Burn Mist unawakened. He looked at his fist and couldn't believe he was able to do it with just 1 blow. The monster saw that he was standing still and decided to attack him, but Suho was able to dodge and counterattack, which destroyed the monster. The system confirmed that he was able to defeat the second monster, and his mission was complete. He was incredibly happy that he had such abilities. Suho was able to level up. He had successfully completed the training where he had to destroy the fog burn and level up. The system gave him a reward for completing the task. He couldn't believe that this was actually happening to him. He decided to test his new powers. He attacked the monster and finally realized that he had truly awakened. He now had abilities and could wield magic. Suho struck, but this time it was different. The monster took his blow as if it didn't feel any pain. This surprised Suho and made him realize that the upcoming battle would be much more difficult than he thought. He was quite astonished that he was unable to destroy the monster. He realized that his opponent had become much stronger than expected. This caused him to not only be surprised, but also anxious, leading him to search for new ways to defeat it. The monster launched its attack right after Suho failed to destroy it. With each passing moment, the attacks became more and more fierce. Suho realized that he now had to endure a veritable storm of power and fury to survive and find a way to defeat this invulnerable enemy. Mistburn had severely wounded Suho in one of its attacks. Feeling the sharp pain, Suho realized he was in big trouble. The situation had become critical, and he knew he had to change his strategy to survive and continue the fight. Suho gathered his strength and kicked the monster, which allowed him to break free and jump back to a safe distance. Once at a distance, he took a deep breath, realizing that this temporary escape gave him time to think about his next move. He saw the heavy wounds on himself and thought that now he could turn into a demonic creature after such an injury. It scared him because he had only just awakened. The system notified him that they had detected life-threatening injuries, and now the effect of long life without sickness had been activated. He couldn't figure out what the skill was, but then he remembered that the ability was in one of the notifications he had received as a reward for killing monsters. The monster pounced on him and knocked him to the ground, trying to inflict maximum damage. It was incredibly strong, and Suho could hardly contain it. He thought that since he was weaker than a D-rank demonic creature, it meant his rank was E. He was glad that he was able to awaken, but didn't understand why he had such a low rank. Suho tried his best to restrain the monster and prevent it from biting him. He didn't know how to defeat it, but he didn't give up. Suho realized that any action he took could be decisive in this deadly battle. Suddenly, Suho received a reward notification. He was given skill points and strength points. The enhanced abilities gave him a chance to win the battle with the monster. After receiving the reward, Suho was able to strike the monster and release his hand from its death grip. He became stronger, and now he could overpower the monster. He was able to throw the monster off him, sending it crashing to the floor. He had to get up and counterattack to finish off the monster before it could get back on its feet again. The monster quickly got up, and their deadly duel continued. Suho didn't know what the monster would do, but he realized that he needed to urgently destroy it before it inflicted a fatal wound on him. Suho started to attack and delivered a heavy, powerful blow. This attack was so strong that the monster recoiled, clearly stunned by the power of the blow. He continued to pursue his target, leaving the monster no chance. But the monster took all the blows and still tried to destroy Suho, who couldn't believe the monster was able to attack him back after receiving such heavy blows. Suho thought that even with such strength, he couldn't overpower the monster. He decided that the skill points given to him would have to be invested in strength. He invested the skill points and his strength increased. He thought that this would be enough to defeat the monster, who was an incredibly powerful opponent. Suho thought that an awakened who had increased his level, he had never heard of such a thing before. The rank of an awakened was determined upon awakening, and it was impossible to overcome this rank. He dodged the monster's attack and prepared to attack it. He didn't know that he determined the ranks of the unawakened as well, but that was the least of his worries right now. He had a dangerous monster to defeat. Suho thought that, apparently, he had the power to go beyond this unfair system. Feeling a new power and capability, he felt that he was now able to overcome the limitations and change the course of events in his favor. He struck another incredibly strong blow. After he increased his strength, the monster flew several meters away and could only stop when it hit the wall. Suho decided that it could not be given the slightest chance. He started attacking it before it could get up, and his strikes reached their target and were much stronger than the past attacks. There was no stopping him. He delivered blow after blow, and the monster could do nothing. It did not defend itself and only took all the blows. After a series of monstrous attacks, Suho struck it in the hope that he had managed to destroy it. The tension and fatigue were making themselves felt, but Suho was determined. Suho was breathing heavily. It was becoming difficult for him to continue the battle. He approached the monster's body to see if he had succeeded in destroying it. The system notified him that he had defeated the monster. He was able to increase his level by several levels. The enhanced abilities and new abilities gave him confidence, and he felt that his efforts were not in vain. Suho decided to sit down and rest. He needed to catch his breath. He was happy that the monster was finally finished. He looked at his own hand again, which was slightly bloody. He clenched his fist and finally realized that he had become an awakened player. Suho realized that now he would have a completely different future. Now he didn't feel like an ant. Now he was more confident and knew what he had to do next. He was sure that now he would succeed. Now that he was awakened, he could save people and deal with all the chaos that enveloped his world. The unknown hunter moved through the other monsters towards the building where Suho was. In his hands was a heavy sword that he dragged along the ground. As the hunter approached the building, he jumped incredibly high in the air. His movements were swift and graceful. His goal was clear, and he aimed to reach it with maximum precision and speed. Suho went to the window to see what was happening outside, but suddenly he noticed that a swift attack was launched at him. He saw the fog burn was already nearby, drawing his sword to attack. Suho, in a slight daze, didn't know what to do. He had to find a way to avoid being hit and work out a plan of action to avoid falling victim to the swift attack. He was attacked by an incredibly strong monster. It was a mist burn awakened. It was C rank, and stopping it would be quite difficult considering Suho's own rank. Burn Mist launched an attack that sent piles of rocks flying down. The debris piled up all around, creating clouds of dust and chaos. Suho needed to quickly orient himself to avoid the effects of the attack and find a way to continue fighting. Throughout the city, an announcement was sounded to the residents. It was very important, and it came from all corners of the city and was repeated more than once. There was an escape from an underground prison in the Korean University district. Residents in the surrounding areas were to evacuate immediately. The soldiers stood on one of the rooftops and watched what was happening below. They were not supposed to interfere with what was happening and waited for the proper order. They were upset that the people below were dying, and they were supposed to just stand by and watch it. The commander asked when the hunters from the association would arrive. His subordinate replied that they needed time to allocate them B-rank hunters, but the other soldier was surprised by his answer. He thought a D rank was needed here. He replied that the Hunters Association assumed that hunters in the area could have encountered serious harm. Looking over the list of infected hunters on his tablet, the soldier saw a familiar face and couldn't believe that he was also infected. He couldn't believe that even C-rank hunters could be infected, given their level of training and defense. Suho saw the dangerous mist burner in front of him, who had jumped onto his floor. He was holding his sword and was about to attack him. He looked at him and thought that he had only frightened him with his attack. He couldn't believe that he had come running to him from the lowest floors. In front of him was an S rank awakened by the fog. Suho realized that, judging from the fact that it came to him with weapons, it was different from other monsters. But Suho was confident in his strength since he had recently managed to raise his level. He had no doubt that he would be able to fight him for life. The monster launched its attack and tried to damage him with its weapon, but Suho managed to dodge the swift attack in time. Suho, after dodging the attack, felt his heart beat faster with excitement. He quickly recovered, trying not to lose concentration, and prepared for the next step to respond to the attack. The monster did not launch another attack, leaving Suho in the dark. This temporary lull only increased his tension, and he tensely waited to see what would happen next, preparing for the monster's possible attack. Suho thought that he was a psychopath. His cruelty and unpredictability made him feel uneasy. Suho realized that he was facing an enemy whose motives and habits were difficult to understand, making him even more dangerous in this intense battle. The monster once again drew his sword, intending to attack Suho, who was standing near the wall. He was incredibly strong and vicious. He was ready to destroy anyone who would stand in his way. As soon as the monster made its attack, Suho threw a fire extinguisher at it, which the monster chopped in half, and its contents filled the entire room. The entire room was shrouded in a thick fog that was formed after the recent attack. It made it difficult to see. Suho, in the midst of this darkness, felt the tension building up and knew that any move he made could be decisive. In such conditions, he decided to take advantage of the situation and escape from the room while he had the chance. He decided that the monster was too strong to continue fighting. Suho thought that it was too much to have such a monster. There was a reason why his awakening level was divided. He realized that he needed to hold out until the other hunters came. He tried his best to leave the building, but there was already a monster behind him who saw where he was headed. Suho was not going to stop and continued to run. The monster was smiling sinisterly, his eyes burning with an eerie, evil light. His confidence and hatred were evident, and his every movement radiated menace. Suho realized that now he was going to face even more danger, and his every action must be carefully calibrated. He turned around and saw that he was being chased by the monster. As he ran past the window, the monster suddenly stopped and looked through it. He saw 3 people on the roof who stood quietly, unsuspecting, and didn't even see him. On the roof were 3 frightened girls who were sure that they had to wait here until the hunters came, but they did not know if they would come to save them. The monster decided to change his target and started to attack the 3 girls, who couldn't resist him or escape from him. He was about to give them a fatal blow. Suho stopped and saw that the monster was no longer chasing him. He also saw that he had jumped out the window, and he realized that he was now attacking someone else. The monster did not manage to hit the girls with his sword, who started to run away in panic, their frightened screams spreading throughout the city. Suho heard the screams and became incredibly angry. He realized that he had to find a way to resist the strong monster, not flee. He ran and jumped after the monster. He thought that he did not have time to wait for the hunter. The monster did not stop at anything, and only he could save the girls. The monster didn't notice Suho jumping out after him and was stunned when Suho suddenly attacked him from the back. Suho took the moment to strengthen his position and prepare for the next step in the battle. Suho was determined. He realized that he had to stop this monster before it destroyed most of the people. His attack only angered the monster, who, as if he didn't feel the strong blow, turned around and attacked him with his sword. Suho barely had time to dodge the sword attack, feeling the blade sweep within centimeters of him. His reflexes went into overdrive, and breathing heavily, he quickly assessed the situation to make his next attack. He was at a safe distance from the monster, thinking that if the monster hit even once, it would be enough to kill him. Suho looked around and saw that the monster was able to destroy a few of the girls standing on the roof of the house, and thought that it was necessary to avenge them. He realized that now he couldn't let it leave quietly. He had to stop it here without letting it kill more people. Suho began to give him a huge amount of body blows in hopes that it would slow him down and he would be able to give him a decisive blow. He continued to beat it with his bare hands. He kept hitting it harder and harder, but the monster still stood on its feet. Suho realized that it would take more strength to break this stubborn monster. Once Suho's strikes began to slow down, the monster decided to seize the moment and struck him with a sword that was able to wound Suho. Suho was in incredible pain from the wound, so the monster decided to finish him off and gave him a physical attack that sent Suho flying straight into the wall. The monster approached him to deliver a decisive blow and destroy him while he sat on the ground, unable to recover. Suho saw that his health level was low. He felt that death was near. He would not be able to continue the fight. He thought that he had lost this fight, but he kept thinking that he was lucky that he didn't die immediately. He thought that the system didn't want him to fall at the hands of the monster yet. The monster suddenly began to laugh evilly. He realized that he had already been able to defeat Suho, and this realization gave him even more evil confidence, making him an even more dangerous opponent. Suddenly, Suho felt a strange tingling sensation inside him. The sensation was unusual and seemed to penetrate him to the core. He realized that something had changed in his body. He raised his hands and thought that these new sensations could be related to his abilities or unexpected powers that he had not yet fully realized. These sensations intensified more and more, leaving Suho stunned. Each tingling sensation was like an electric shock. It took over his mind and body, causing mixed feelings of fear and curiosity. Suho was immersed in this inexplicable state, trying to understand what was happening and how it could affect his future actions in battle. But the monster was already close and attacked him. The system notified him that his level of fatigue was high. He slowly began to lose consciousness. He could no longer defend himself and continue the fight with the monster. Suho thought to beg for mercy as the monster approached him to destroy him. The roof of the house suddenly began to crack, and after a moment was destroyed. An unknown monster destroyed the roof. Suho could not understand what kind of creature it was, but he was sure that it had appeared in time, thus saving his life. Suho and the monster collapsed down from the roof. Suho had no strength to stop his fall and was rapidly approaching the ground. He realized that he could not avoid the impact. He fell to the ground with all his might, punching the ground with him. The huge impact created cracks and knocked out pieces of earth. The monster also couldn't avoid falling. Suho, immersed in the darkness and dust, felt his strength draining. He was already bleeding to death. He thought that he was saved by an ant before waking up. He was an ordinary man who often drew them. It was him that Suho thought of at the threshold of death. The ant confirmed that he was the one who saved him. He apologized for arriving too late. Now he would not let the monster destroy him. He looked at the monster that had crippled Suho and brought him to the brink of death and was ready to avenge him. He realized that the monster was too weak for him. The ant was extremely angry at the monster. He thought they were insects that had ruined the health of a noble man like Suho. He was able to easily destroy the monster with one deadly attack, after which the monster shattered into small pieces. The monsters walked around the institute, looking for new prey to destroy and infect with blue flames so that they would continue to create the same monsters. One of the monsters saw a living man who was standing with a mop in his hands, unsuspecting. He was immersed in his thoughts and did not realize the approaching threat. Seeing the monster, the man was frightened and froze on the spot. His face turned pale with horror, and he could not understand who or what it was, so monstrous. Panic seized him, and he frantically tried to think of how to save himself, but fear paralyzed his actions. He threw the mop and started to call for help, grabbing his head with his hands. He lowered his head down and didn't see that the monster attacking him had been destroyed. At that moment, all the monsters were destroyed in a matter of seconds, and there was a huge echo throughout the city as Baru began to emit a wave of magical energy. The soldiers who were standing nearby couldn't understand what had just happened because they felt something strange and very strong nearby. But Baru immediately went back to his master, Suho, and told him that they hadn't seen each other for a long time and that he was very happy to see his little master now. Baru remembered back to when Suho was a little boy, drawing shadow warriors in his room. When he looked up, he saw before him the mighty Baru, who was holding in his clutches the drawing that Suho had made. Baru was very surprised that his young master had drawn him. He couldn't hold back his tears because he was so touched by this beautiful creation. Now Suho began to come to his senses and opened his eyes. He couldn't understand where he was, but as soon as he opened his eyes fully, he saw that he was in bed and covered with a blanket. The first thing he could say was, "Aunt," but the doctor standing next to him couldn't understand what he had just said. A little later, he started calling his uncle, and the doctor still couldn't understand what he was saying. But it didn't matter because the doctor just asked him how badly he was hurt and that the world was too cruel and dangerous, and he would hire a couple of bodyguards for him. But Suho told her he was fine. Then he started to watch TV, and they showed the government commenting on the incident at the University of Arts. The incident, which injured many people, became a hot topic of discussion. It was the discovery of the Mist Burns monster, which charges hunters and turns them into monsters. Although the incident occurred in the heart of the city, the Hunter Association was unable to react quickly, and when the hunters arrived on the scene, they saw utter chaos and destruction. But what was even more amazing was that all the monsters were destroyed, and the only question was, who or what destroyed them? Some witnesses started saying that suddenly, the people who had turned into monsters came out of nowhere. Suho, watching all this, couldn't realize that he wasn't really dreaming because it was really real, and it wasn't just some stupid dream, and that the awakened one becomes stronger by increasing his level. At the moment, Suho is level 5, and he realized that it must be true that he got a small rank during a battle with a hunter who was charged. But he couldn't understand how he managed to survive. At that moment, he heard a voice that said it was because Beru got rid of those parasites. As soon as he looked down at the floor, he saw a huge shadow looking at him with its huge eyes. As soon as Beru regained his shadow form, he said it was good to see him again after all these years as a young lord, and that as a young lord, he had grown up and become such a wonderful person. Beru couldn't contain his feelings. Suho slowly began to put the pieces of lost memories together, and he realized it was the ants because, as a child, he loved them very much. He was one of the black creatures that had been with him in his childhood, but he couldn't understand why he could only remember it now. Beru said that the young ruler had crossed the measurement boundary to meet him. Still, Suho couldn't understand why he had lived with these black creatures as a child, but now he was asking himself too many questions. For now, what was more important were his memories. He was bigger, but Beru replied that traveling through a dimension requires a lot of mana. When he came out, he was big and intimidating, but the card system indicated the level of a soldier. As soon as Beru found out that he was down to a common soldier, he was furious. He didn't like that he was down to a common soldier. Suho immediately got to his feet and started to say that he was feeling better and that it was really his doing, to which Beru replied that it was true. No matter how you looked at it, he was a great healer, and his original mission was to dispel the shadow seal. But it seems he's already broken it of his own free will. Indeed, he is the young ruler. But Suho couldn't understand what this seal had to do with him and Beru. Beru began to explain that Suho could accept that all he had seen was what he had really lived through, and that he had become much stronger since he had fought him last. The great Shadow Lord, Sung Jin Woo, had sealed his power along with his memory because he wanted Suho to live an ordinary life as its lord. But Suho couldn't believe his own ears because Sung Jin Woo was his father. So he's in touch with his father, who left home. But Beru said he didn't leave home, he went into space. Suho couldn't understand what space was, but Beru began to explain briefly that the Shadow Adeka is in space now, fighting monsters for this world. His father is defending their world with his own life, fighting powerful beings. More specifically, he's fighting against powerful opponents, and the Iterum is a creature trying to take over their world by sending his apostles to battle. His father and Beru fought many enemies on the way here, and the opening of the gates on Earth is also the effect of the war that is still going on right now. But Suho asked him what it means that his mother is out there too, because she disappeared on the day when he was still with his father, and he thought they were together somewhere. When he heard that, Beru got really angry because he couldn't understand how it was possible that Miss Hain had disappeared. Beru said it was probably the apostles' trickery. There was no doubt about it. Suho heard this and asked if he wanted to say that it's all the fault of the Itarim, and his parents can't come back because the Itarim interfered in their lives. But Beru realized that the young lord really wanted to meet the two of them. Suho replied that, of course, he wanted to, and now there's only one way to get stronger, to save his mother and meet his father. But Beru said that because of the Dark Lord's war, he can't return to Earth, so the young lord needs to become stronger to find and rescue Miss Hain in himself. Now, they will use this key to raise his level, and at that moment a notification window appeared that showed he has a new quest. Quest, Shadow Test. He is the son of the Great One, and now all his innate abilities are sealed. To deal with this great power, he needs to prove his qualifications and enter the Dark Dungeon and prove his abilities. This item is the key to the Dark Dungeon. This key will allow you to travel to the Dark Dungeon. It can be used in the shadow of the Sacred Protector. Beru immediately said that the young master must insert this key into his own shadow. As soon as he did so, shadow gates began to appear in front of him. In the shadow gate, there was a portal that he had to go through right now. Baru briefly told him to go in and get back the powers that belong to him alone. But Suho, thinking about it, couldn't quite believe that there's a cosmos, a war of the gods, a lord of shadows, and it all just doesn't make sense. But now all he has to do is gather his strength and save his mother and father, because if he can only face them when he's stronger, he decided that he would level up as much as he could just to get strong enough to fight. Beru, behind him, was very excited by this speech and started to remember when his Shadow Lord told him to go to the ground and break Suho's seal. Beru said that he was talking about the seal of the Shadow Lord, to which Sung Jinwoo said that the Itarim could invade the earth as well, and he should return his son's memory to the seal and let him protect the land. Otherwise, he should act at his discretion depending on the situation on Earth. Beru finally realized that if this task was entrusted to him, he would stay by the young lord's side and help him level up. At that moment, Suho began to enter the portal, and on the other side, he slowly started to come out of it. Beru began to explain that this is the abode of the dead, where no living person dares to enter without the master's permission, and this is the dark dungeon inhabited by many creatures. Suho immediately realized that it is a dungeon of shadows and looks more like a ruined city than a dungeon. But suddenly, he couldn't understand why he felt uncomfortable here, yet it also seemed very familiar to him, as if he had been here before. At that moment, his thoughts were shattered by the notification system, which started showing him a status window. It said that the leadership of the task of survival in the Dungeon of Shadows will never recognize such a weakling as a master in its lands. He must hold on for the allotted time and prove his competence. Suho read the notice and realized that he had been allotted an hour. As soon as the trial began, a creature appeared behind Suho that didn't hesitate for a second and started to attack him in the back. Suho sensed its presence, swung around and kicked the goblin, causing it to fly off to the side. Suho realized that he had to keep his eyes open because this goblin had come out of nowhere. But when he looked closely, he saw that it wasn't just any goblin, but a scout goblin, to which Beru said that if the scout was here, there were other goblins around, and that he should deal with it before it called its friends. Suho rushed into battle, but Beru warned his young lord that of course there were goblins, but he should not be so careless. He immediately told Suho that the goblin didn't even have a name or color, and that it was weaker than him by several times. Grabbing its hand, Suho started to squeeze harder, and taking the goblin's stone axe out of his inventory, he began to attack the enemy. In a matter of seconds, he destroyed the goblin with a single blow. Then, the notification system began to show that he had destroyed the goblin scout. Suho immediately told Beru that those who are stronger than him have different colored names. But at that moment, the two of them began to hear a strange sound. As soon as they turned to where the sound was coming from, they saw a goblin sitting on the roof, calling out to its friends. This made Suho angry because he realized there was another scout. Just a minute later, other goblins with yellow-colored names showed up. The goblin captains also arrived after the others. Seeing all this, Suho started to ask Beru if he could help him, and Beru replied that he was willing to fight, but he was too far away from the Overlord, so he couldn't replenish his magic power. He had to save his strength, and besides, if he participated in the battle, the amount of experience points Suho would get would be greatly reduced. Suho immediately realized that meant he wouldn't help, and at that moment, he started to use a skill and decided that he would try to do it himself. The goblin axe that was behind him began to rise into the air, and with it, the battle axe flew towards our hero. At the same moment, he started to use the skill and control it in the air, destroying all the goblins in his way with the help of his skill, which was indicated in the status window as if he had acquired an invisible hand. But at that moment, an arrow flew towards our hero, narrowly missing his head, but he raised his hand in time to catch it. Looking up, he saw that the arrow came from another goblin who was standing on the roof. The goblin pulled back the magical bowstring, preparing another shot, but in just a second, the goblin archer was destroyed. As Suho watched the battle, he realized that he was adaptable, and this unusual birth of a hero from myths was similar to the childhood story of the Little Lord. The Little Lord was free to use the power of the lords, but this power was created to destroy everything, so it was harming the peaceful world. But now that the apostles are invading the land again, the Little Lord's village is finally beginning to blossom. At that moment, Suho leveled up, and he realized that the ruler's strength could raise no more than a kilogram. Just then, another goblin came behind him and attacked him in the back, smiling evilly, pleased to have wounded the young Shadow Lord. But a retaliatory strike came in, killing the goblin in a matter of seconds. Baru noticed this and started asking how he was feeling, but all that was overshadowed by the appearance of a new creature on the battlefield, emitting a huge red energy. It was the strongest goblin, the Centurion. Suho didn't pay any attention to it, but drew his weapon and slowly started to turn towards the goblins that were attacking from all sides. He was ready for them and got into a fighting stance. He began to fight, swinging his blade and taking down one goblin after another. Then, he threw the dagger he was holding straight at the goblin centurion, and with incredible speed, the blade reached its target. Suho began to realize that he felt more alive than when his powers were down, and now he was ready to fight with all the strength he had at the moment. As he fought, the opponent's points slowly dropped, but it wasn't over. He fought with all his might, certain he could beat them and hold on for 4 hours, as it was his best chance to level up against tough opponents. Just a few minutes later, the notification system showed that he had learned the resilience skill, and his level had been raised. Soon after, he managed to take out all the goblins in his way. The notification system also said he had minutes to complete the mission. Baru said he was doing great and had no doubt for a minute that he would pass the challenge. The notification system also said that Suho had received a reward for completing the challenge, and the reward was a runestone. If he used it, he would gain the shadow extraction skill. Baru was very happy because the young lord would be extracting shadows. Suho also noticed that during the battle, he had gained the resilience skill, so after awakening, he could now access the skills and the level up system. Compared to the time before his awakening, he had become much stronger. Baru explained that Suho's leveling system was an improved version of the system that the Lord had used in the past, and it was also a means for his steady growth. He thought he wasn't awakened, but he turned out to be the strongest Shadow Lord ever. He received the runestone, which he could break and absorb. Once Suho cracked the runestone, the notification system said he had learned the shadow extraction skill. He realized he could now create shadow soldiers. This skill allows the dead body of a monster to be turned into a soldier like himself. This is the power that makes the current Shadow Lord, Sung Jin Woo, exist. It's similar to a necromancer's skill, but Suho could only control those weaker than him. He had heard that the summoning skill wasn't very popular with hunters. As soon as Suho wanted to extract the shadow, the notification system prompted him to name the command for the shadow extraction skill. Suho realized he needed a special command to extract it. Baru started to suggest that the command should be something intuitive. After a moment of thought, Suho used the same phrase as his father, "Rise up." As soon as he gave the command, the shadow began to gather and rise. Suho saw a small green hand appear on the wall, and once the preparations were finished, he saw the first-level shadow goblins appear. He couldn't believe his eyes. This was shadow extraction, and it wasn't as bad a skill as he initially thought. The shadow soldiers created from extraction were a little weaker than when they were alive and smaller in stature. The notification system showed that they would disappear after 24 hours. Baru was surprised that Suho didn't have the shadow power skill, which affects intelligence and level. This would be a very useful skill in the future. It was an incredibly good skill. Suho realized this and told him not to be upset. But now he realized that he hadn't eaten in a day. His stomach started to growl. He asked Baru how he could get out of there, and Baru said that with the key to the shadow dungeon, he could get out at any time. So they decided to go and eat. A little while later, Suho was sitting in her hospital tent, enjoying her meal. He also had no idea that hospital food was so delicious. Baru, watching him, said that his little overlord, he would explain what to do next. They were given only 3 tasks. The first was to protect the Earth from demons from outer space. To this, Suho suggested they go into the dungeon and catch demonic creatures. Baru confirmed that as they hunted the creatures, their level would increase, and the stronger they were, the safer the Earth would be. The third task was to find his missing mom. Suho asked if there was any way to find out where she was, but Baru said that if they kept catching these creatures, maybe they could find a clue. Eventually, they needed to go to the dungeon. The final third task was the most important one. Baru had to regain his strength because he didn't like the regular soldiers and wanted to show him all his enemy power. Suho started asking what he should do to regain his strength, and Baru replied that he could absorb some of the knowledge and magic items. It used to be an ineffective way to use the item, thus becoming a shadow soldier. But since he couldn't get magic power, there was nothing left for him to do but eat something magical. Anyway, Suho decided he had to go to the dungeon, and now they were going to prepare. But to enter the dungeon, the Hunter Association would determine the level of magical ability. Determining the level of magical ability, he was an awakened man who was raising his level. He now had to check what grade he'd get because it would be great if it was S rank. But the next day, when he went to the Hunter Association, the girl said that his magical ability level was E rank, making him the weakest hunter. A little while later, he left the Hunter Association and decided he had to figure out something to get into the dungeon. Beru started to say that he had heard that a hunter's level was determined by the amount of magic power, and the little lord, focusing on increasing his physical stats, would certainly prove to be inferior to his skills. But Suho said he shouldn't be comforted. It's more frustrating that way. The Shadow Powers were evaluating the level of whether he could defend the land so early, but he still needed to raise his level because he heard that hunters of this rank couldn't just join the team. Entering the dungeon would be a problem, but there was one way he was going to check out right now. The capture team fights in the dungeon, then there's the collection team that takes the bodies of the creatures, and finally there's the extraction team, which is the extraction team. That way he could get into the dungeon. Except for the capture team, hunters of low rank, even with E rank, can enter the dungeon. A little later, the dungeon workers started carrying magic crystals and bringing them out. Suho, who was standing near the magic crystals, that began to scratch his head because he had no idea it was such a hard job. He turned around and began to tell another hunter who was standing next to him that he was thankful to know him because he didn't know anyone else. This guy was a teacher's aide in the art department of a Korean university. He was also a self-awakened E rank, and was lucky to have him around because he was able to work in the dungeon. But suddenly, the guy asked Suho to start apologizing to him for giving him problems at the university because there were no other awakened people there besides him. He got scared and ran away. Suho recalled this situation when he was told that he was an awakened person and should do something, to which he replied that he had an E rank. Now, he was apologizing for not doing anything at the time, but Suho told him to raise his head because he was also an E-ranked awakened hunter. The association said that E-rank hunters should run away as fast as they could when they encountered a demonic creature, but that guy was just surprised that Suho was also an E-rank, to which Suho replied that his magical ability scores are equal. But that guy couldn't believe it was true because when he was running away, he saw Suho fighting a demonic creature on the roof. Now he couldn't realize if it was true and if he was wrong. If his rank had gone up after the creature attacked, then he's really cool. But at that moment, Beru appeared next to that guy and started saying that the little lord is cool. The guy turned around to see whose voice it was, and as soon as he saw the shadow soldier, he immediately sidestepped and started yelling that there was a demonic creature here. Suho didn't understand why he came out of the shadows, but the shadow soldier answered that the little lord was now at the level of a weak ant larva, and so it would be safer if he stayed close to him and protected him. The guy started to get to his feet and asked if he had awakened as a summoned hunter, to which Suho replied that it seemed so. There are a lot of hunters who have no skills at all, but he was lucky. But this guy had a skill, so Suho teased him about whether that was why he was running away from the monsters so fast. As soon as he spoke, the guy sat down and got nervous. Suho said it was just a joke and then turned around, starting to tell Suho that he had finally killed him. Suho started looking into the cave and realized that this was the first time he was in a dungeon other than the Shadow Dungeon. Now he's facing a task force going after demonic creatures. This is looking at what appeared to be an empty dungeon, and judging by the fact that they had only come across demonic wolves, but wolf pelts are worth a lot of money, they needed to collect that stuff too. But there are also sometimes groups of magic stones, so there's nothing left to do but keep looking. Don't get frustrated, just go through the dungeon to the end to find out. But at that moment, a guy showed up and started telling the cast something here. As soon as they got inside, they saw this huge room that was glowing brightly. They couldn't figure out what the ruins were, and maybe they should go out and call for backup. They couldn't recognize any demonic creatures, but they couldn't understand why there was such a structure but no monsters. Now they decided to find out. At that moment, they saw some strange weapon in front of them, and nobody could understand what it was. Was it treasure hidden here instead of the boss? The guys couldn't figure it out because they didn't even think there could be a weapon stuck in the ground. Really cool. So the guys decided to try to see what it really was. But one of the guys said they'd have to test it to know for sure. It looked like a great weapon, but the other guy said to be careful. There could be traps with such a treasure. The captain approached the ball and said he'd take it and not leave. When he touched the sword, it began to glow a bright color, and the captain said that even if he had a C rank, he could overcome it. But at that moment, there was a bright flash of light that showed through the entire space in the dungeon. And the captain couldn't understand what it was because he saw a whole different place. The other guy standing next to him said there didn't seem to be any trap, but the captain should be careful with that sword. They didn't know what it was, and he'd have to be more careful next time. But at that moment, the captain swung his sword and destroyed his first comrade. The other hunters couldn't understand what he had just done, but the captain began to turn into some strange creature and said that whoever dared to take the sword was the Lord of the Fang, and now he must destroy all those who invaded the Fang Lord's domain. So the captain began to destroy one hunter after another. But in the other dungeon, the workers couldn't realize that they had just been closed. Suho started to show his comrade he had the ability to summon goblins. The guy started to say that he had heard that these abilities only summon 1 or 2 creatures, and he had summoned 3. This guy's power was definitely abnormal, but he couldn't understand why he was so low ranked. You can only summon 3, and to use shadow extraction, you need a body, which is inconvenient. But you can just get goblin bodies from the dungeon and use them as free labor. Suho just now realized that shadow extraction is a really good ability. A hunter with a low rank is classified by the Hunter Association and cannot enter the dungeon alone. Since he started to divide the hunter's rank, a lot of time has passed and more mistakes are made by the measuring machine. So when he hangs up the level, maybe his rank will be measured again. Suho started to tell the taker that if he remembers their 3rd mission, they can do it here because he said that it regenerates if it eats something magical. I'll tell you how many magic crystals these crystals contain, magical powers, and that it doesn't help with the loot anyway. So why don't I do it now? Suho suddenly asked. Beru, did the Overlord really show up here? Maybe something his father, but Beru replied that it wasn't like that. His father wasn't the only Overlord. If it was his father, his village would be rebuilt in a second. But this creature and that odor were something else entirely, and right now they needed to be wary. The other diggers who were in this dungeon couldn't figure out what that noise was coming from. As soon as they turned towards it, they realized that all that rumbling was coming from the cave right in front of them. Then, they wondered if they had any direction to where their capture team was headed. But that's when they started looking closer, and they noticed that some strange creature had begun to emerge from the cave. As they got closer, the diggers realized it wasn't human, and this was a demonic creature. But they could not understand where it came from because the hunters had recently entered the cave. At the same moment, they started to turn around and run with all their might towards the exit to escape. But one of the workers started waving at the demonic creature in panic, and although he was gripped by panic, he desperately continued waving his pickaxe. But the demon dog came closer and grabbed the pickaxe with its huge mouth. The miner, looking at the destroyed pickaxe, could not understand how this monster managed to destroy it in a matter of seconds. At that moment, he realized that he was about to be finished. With a desperate cry, he began to call for help from the other hunters. Just as the monster was about to attack the worker jumped back, at which point Suho intervened and ran up from somewhere and hit the demon dog on the head with all his might. Suho, at the same moment, shouted to his partner that he would buy them time and they should get out. Desperately, his comrade started to run away with all his legs, and lastly said only that he was grateful to him. Suho, for his part, started looking at the demonic dogs and realized that their names were highlighted in orange, and that meant he was not at the same level as the Mistburners in that women's university in Korea. But now he realized that he could handle them alone quite well because he had already raised his level and was now much stronger than before. But suddenly he felt angry and started telling him that he was ordering him to run outside. After all, he didn't have to help every time of his own free will. But his comrade replied in a desperate voice that he was all alone and would try his best to help him. Suho, on the other hand, turned his head and asked him to intercede if he was in danger. He would still leave 3 goblins to protect him, just in case. Now, he took out his inventory and began to select the weapons he would use to fight against the demonic dogs. After all, this was the goblin weapon he had gotten in the Shadow Dungeon, and right now it would be better than a pickaxe. His comrade didn't understand. Could he really even summon weapons, and where did he get such abilities from? Without thinking long, our hero with all his might began to rush towards the demonic dogs. Not even a moment later, the notification system showed Suho that he had defeated the steel-toothed lichen. The comrades left behind only looked on and rejoiced that their young lord was so strong. But Suho reached back and began to command the demonic dog to let his shadow rise. The three goblins and his comrade looked on in horror as he was able to summon the demonic dog. And as soon as the demonic dog was summoned, it immediately started attacking the other demonic dogs, thus helping Suho. Baru, who was watching his little lord, was happy that he was already getting used to fighting using shadow power. But our hero realized that retrieving and summoning shadows didn't waste his mana. If he could summon more creatures as his magic power increased, he would have an entire region. Once he destroyed the demon dog, he immediately decided to summon it. The goblin who was standing beside our hero's partner watched with the same amazement as he summoned another demon dog. At this moment, the notification system once again showed that he was able to defeat the steel-toothed lichen and had gained a new level. Following that, Suho began to summon another wolf, and this time it was the last one he had defeated. At this moment, his comrade began to ask Suho what this was. After all, this was clearly not a rank E ability. How could he be able to resurrect demonic beings? Suho suddenly hesitated as he began to realize that he had lost his temper this time and needed to quickly think of a way to talk himself out of it. Turning around, he said that this was basically rank E, but his comrade could not understand. Had Suho intentionally registered under a false rank? Suho suddenly turned around towards the cave where the demonic creatures came out of and realized that he still had a task left and one enemy remaining. But he couldn't figure out what that enemy was, since he had already destroyed all the lichens. In the distance, he began to see a strange silhouette of a man and could not understand if it was his last enemy, but it looked like it was a person from the capture team. Suddenly, Suho's comrade began to approach that hunter and asked if he really survived. After all, they were attacked by demonic creatures and almost killed. At this moment, the expression on the hunter's face changed, and the guys realized that now, as soon as the hunter approached, Suho pulled his comrade aside. At the same moment, a sword flew right in front of his face and broke his glasses. As soon as the huge sword struck the ground, Suho managed to pull his comrade aside in fear. Suho immediately began to order his wolves to attack this hunter without a second thought. The wolves from all sides began to pounce on the hunter to destroy him. At the same time, Suho began to pull his comrade away and said that he was unlucky this time because he had once again been caught by a demonic creature that had lost its mind. To make matters worse, the color of his name had turned red, which meant that he was a very strong opponent. After all, the redder the color, the more dangerous the creature. At the Women's University in Korea, he had hardly felt how strong red-level creatures were. So the sensible thing to do would be to take his comrade and run as far away from this place as possible. As soon as they left the area where that hunter was, our hero began to ask Baru what he meant when he said he could sense the Overlord. Baru replied that the hunter carried his energy, but was not even close in power to the Overlord. However, even so, he was not his equal yet, to which Suho replied that he understood everything. Right now, he needed to open his inventory and come up with a plan. But Baru couldn't understand. Did the little lord really want to fight? Suho immediately replied that the system said that it was in some way a safety mechanism to ensure his growth, which meant that since he was given this assignment, he had a chance to win. Besides, if he wanted to meet his parents, he needed to get stronger sooner rather than later. And to get stronger, he needed to destroy this monster and raise his level. After scattering all the weapons he had in his inventory, he decided that he would defeat the enemy now and be able to raise his level. Beru looked at Suho and was very touched by his words. Beru, in turn, began to say that he faces trials he can't handle over and over again and never avoids battles, and that with this weak character comes the character of a lord. Just as the hunter began to approach Suho, Beru said that the body of that thing that had taken hold of the hunter was a sword. If he could wrestle the sword away from the bearer would no longer be able to move. At this moment, the hunter began to approach Suho little by little. But at this moment, the shadow wolves began to surround him and attack him from all sides. As soon as one of the wolves was able to grab the hunter's sword, our hero realized that the hunter was indeed up again after using magic. Baru added that shadow soldiers are essentially immortal. If there is magic, they can regenerate as long as they want. Suho realized at this moment that the power of the shadow soldiers was the key to superiority over any enemy. But at this moment, he saw that the hunter had easily destroyed his shadow wolf with one swing of his sword. Baru added that the hunter was destroying the shadow so easily because his magic was still weak. Suddenly, the hunter turned to Suho, saying how a lowly person like him could use the power of a shadow lord. Suho was surprised that the hunter could speak, but Baru jumped into the conversation and started yelling at the hunter. How dare he call a lord from the Shadow Lord lineage a lowlife? The hunter didn't like this and replied that he hadn't thought of meeting the Shadow Lord lineage again. Without thinking long, the hunter started shouting that Suho was the Fang Lord's enemy. Without thinking long, Suho began to raise his weapon and said that he would now begin to test his level. With all speed, he started throwing his weapon, destroying the goblins and aiming it straight at the hunter. But the hunter easily began to repel all of his attacks. Suho realized that, as expected from the red name, the hunter was easily repelling him. After scattering his weapons all over the area, Suho decided that he would act differently in this case. Without thinking long, he extended his arm and decided that he would just take quantity now. Beru, being behind him, realized that this was the ruler's strength that he had been using since he was an infant. As he continued to attack, Suho made sure that all of his attacks were easily repelled by that red hunter. As soon as he came close, the hunter struck a few more times and broke the weapon he was holding. Looking at the hunter, Suho saw an intimidating gaze directed straight at him. Dodging all of the hunter's attacks, Suho realized that it felt like it was impossible for him to fight back. If this hunter hit him once, he would be finished. If he were to stall for time, his chances of winning would be gone. But suddenly the hunter began to shout, "Are you really going to avoid the battle like this? Right now you look like a coward hiding behind the Shadow Lord and the Shadow Soldiers." But Suho began to smile and replied to the hunter, "Affecting your parents is a violation of the rules, and you don't have the confidence to approach even if you provoke like this." Thinking back to that conversation with Beru, if his seal is wrong, why doesn't he regain the ability to climb the tower? But Beru replied that his powers were sealed when he was still young, and he could be said to have regained the skill of those shadows. If he had those powers, he could rival Iterim. However, this place isn't a dream or reality. It's a test to see if he can handle the powers. The physical strength was destined to disappear whether the test succeeded or not. Then it's true, it's just a game. The experience of being in the tower wasn't meaningless. Suho recalled that he remembered precisely and clearly the sensations he felt when he passed the Tower of Trials, at least if he had something like an iron glove, like back then. Then Suho recalled Beru's words. Shadow soldiers are essentially immortal. If there's magic, they can regenerate for as long as they want. And if you think of it that way, Beru can also change form at will. In that case, he can now come up with new plans to overpower this hunter. Once the preparations were over, he began to summon his shadow dogs anew. But the red hunter continued to attack and shouted, "Suho, are you really at it again? Haven't you learned that it doesn't work to send those meaningless shadow dogs at me? Right now, I'll just cut you down to the point where your shadow soldiers can't get close to me." But at this moment, something strange began to happen on the battlefield. Suho began to extract shadows and transform them into matter that enveloped his hands. At this moment, the red hunter made a decisive strike, causing a huge explosion to sound after the strike. But with his head down, the red hunter couldn't realize what had just happened, as his attack was simply blocked. As soon as he lowered his gaze, he saw Suho blocking his attack and said, "Lycan Steel Fang lives up to his name." Just now, the notification system showed that he was able to retrieve the Iron Glove transformation form. Suho immediately realized that with this skill, he would be able to easily approach and deal with this hunter. As soon as they started exchanging blows, the entire atmosphere in the dungeon changed. Beru, who was watching from behind, couldn't believe his eyes. Suho was able to use the Shadow Soldier's weapons. A far superior level Shadow Lord was in a state of mastery and could manipulate all shadows at will, like an ant caterpillar that had just discovered shadow power. How was he able to discover the next stage of shadow power that no one had ever told him about? The martial arts mastery that Suho had just shown was very impressive. This ruler power that Suho had mastered without any support or hints was amazing. Most importantly, the way he used the shadow power, Beru realized that Suho had completely mastered it. At this moment, Suho threw the red hunter straight into the nearest wall with all his might, causing a huge explosion. But that wasn't enough. The red hunter suddenly jumped up from his seat and started screaming loudly. All of this was not enough, as the weapon that Suho started to raise flew straight at the red hunter. Beru immediately noticed that his little lord had become much stronger than before. Right now, he realized that Suho was a true prodigy. As soon as he managed to defeat the Red Hunter said that with his red name, he thought he wouldn't be defeated, but it was all over. Beru immediately added that he didn't doubt his victory for a moment. Raising his hand, Suho realized that he had gotten used to a new fighting technique during this fight. He decided to look at his awards, and the notification system immediately showed them. The notification system asked if he wanted a quest reward, to which Suho replied that he was willing to accept. The notification system started showing the rewards for the quest. The first reward was the Storm Strike Rune Stone, and the second skill he had mastered was Storm Strike. At this moment, the aura enveloping Suho began to glow bright blue, and he realized that the skill was the most coveted reward, and he instinctively already knew how to use it. He decided to test it in action while he had time and practice. He turned his attention to the weapon that lay at his feet. The voice kept saying to the Red Hunter that this was all disappointing. After all, this was just boundless human greed. When Suho raised his sword, it would completely devour him. As soon as Suho raised the sword, the notification system showed that he had acquired a new item, the Lycan Fang. Suho immediately noticed that this sword looked much better than the goblin sword he had gotten in the first dungeon when he was training and leveling up. But the voice from within the sword continued to ponder that there was really a person who had inherited the Fang and was not under its control. When all the preparations were finished, Suho started practicing with his new weapon in different directions, destroying all the rocks that were nearby. He began to use his Storm Strike skill. The large mana consumption from a single strike could be a problem, but he liked the effect. Suho had told Beru that the reaction to shadow extraction was completely different, and the power of shadows was 1,000, if not tens of thousands of times stronger. As soon as Suho swung his sword for the last time, he noticed that his comrade started to come to his senses. Walking over to him, he asked if he was all right, but his comrade couldn't understand what had happened. Opening his eyes fully, he saw the Red Hunter who was lying next to him. Suho said that he couldn't explain everything in 2 words, and they would talk outside a little later. All the hunters and workers started to leave through the portal. Sitting on a bench, Suho's comrade began to ask him what he would do. He replied that he was going to check if there were still survivors in the dungeon. As soon as Suho entered the dungeon, his comrade couldn't understand. Did this guy really awaken with the summoning skill in such a trifling situation? He couldn't understand when Suho had become so strong, although right now it didn't matter anymore. Watching all the survivors who called their relatives to say that they were fine, most of them couldn't understand what had happened inside the dungeon. The guy sitting on the bench realized that what mattered was that all these people were alive because of Suho. Meanwhile, our hero inside the dungeon started destroying all the Iron Demon dogs. Once he destroyed some of them, he told Beru that there were still many more wolf monsters inside. Beru replied that they all counted as experience and one should not miss them. Suho turned around and started to wonder why the attack power of this sword had dropped drastically, but the voice inside the sword said that it was probably because it was helping the descendant of the Shadow Lord. Beru began to explain to the voice inside the sword that showing strength against those weaker than him was a pathetic act. The voice replied that he had never seen a hunter chase after prey that was weaker than he was, but still, Beru added that the young lord had defeated him, even though he was many times stronger. Suho turned around and couldn't realize that he was now watching a talking bug and a talking sword, and he still couldn't get used to such a thing. A little later, he still reached the place where that sword was taken out from. After examining everything there, he saw that all the hunters who were there had been destroyed. The sword suddenly began to speak. Everyone who entered here will be destroyed. My mission is to protect the Fang Lord's shrine. But Suho took the sword in his hands and, with all his might, shoved it into the same place from which it had been taken out. Turning around, he started to look at the destroyed hunter. But the notification system immediately showed him that the target for releasing the shadow was present and asked if he wished to extract the shadow. Suho immediately started to ask Beru if it was possible to use shadow release on humans, to which Beru immediately replied that if it was a destroyed body, any creature could become a shadow soldier. But Suho, without thinking long, picked up the destroyed hunters and started carrying them to the exit of the dungeon. Beru couldn't understand if he wasn't going to use the shadow release. Suho turned around and only said that forcing someone to fight after death was more like punishment. Beru was greatly surprised by these words, for he couldn't even imagine that the young lord wouldn't subdue the annihilated. At this moment, Suho began to ask Beru if it was true that this was the Lord's shrine. Beru replied that it was true. Suho continued by saying that his father and the lord he destroyed were somehow related to the Itarim. Beru explained that the Itarim are the non-Nash enemies of his overlord, and that overlord is a past enemy. There are 9 monarchs, including their lord, his father, Seung Jin Woo, the monarch of the dead, lord of the shadows, protector of the entire planet who has saved it more than once. First, there is the king of beasts, the lord of fangs, who matches the strength of the other monarchs. Following him is the queen of insects, the lord of plague. Next comes the king of monstrous humanoids, the monarch of the iron body, the king of demons, known as the monarch of white flames. Then there is the king of giants, the monarch of the beginning. After that comes the king of the snowfolk, the monarch of frost, the king of demonic specters, the monarch of transfiguration. Finally, there is the king of berserk dragons, the monarch of destruction. All 9 kings have power beyond comprehension, but 8 of them died trying to attack the earth. And that's right, the Shadow Lord is his master, the one who destroyed the Fang Lord. At this moment, the sword began to speak. If my strength was at the proper level, I would have torn apart the Shadow Lord's blood descendant and thrown it to be eaten by the wolves. Suho replied that it wasn't that he didn't understand his wishes, but his father had defeated the other kings just to protect the land. Was he also only trying to protect this place from invaders? No matter what side you're on, they're trying to protect what they care about. And all he cares about is that he only wants to fight him because of a blood bond. And if protecting this place is his mission, isn't it silly to show hatred for a father who couldn't defeat a Fang Lord? He just wants to meet the parents he can't see because of the invaders. And for the sake of his goal, he's willing to rely on any force. When the Itarim begin their invasion, this place won't be safe either. If he helps him, he will protect this place too. The voice that lurked within the sword could not understand. Was he really proposing to join forces with the Blood Heir? Grasping the hilt of the sword, Suho decided to make sure. Would this sword agree to serve him to protect this place and the entire planet? At this moment, the Shadow and Fangs would fight hand in hand on this front in unison. A little later, the reporters sitting in the cafe with Suho's friends started asking questions regarding yesterday's incident in the dungeon. They wanted to know all the details that he could tell them since he was there personally. Lim Dog-yoon, the survivor of yesterday's incident, picked up his coffee cup and said that he would tell them everything. He actually wanted the case to get publicity and the attitude of Suho, who has a rank of E, to improve. This was a great opportunity for Suho for saving the day. A little later, a headline came out about an event where a rank E hunter had single-handedly saved other hunters in a dungeon. The article contained information about the brave hunter who threw himself at the monster to save people, as well as interviews with many of the survivors he saved. Elsewhere, the guys sitting at the table started scratching their pens behind their ears. For now, it was time to choose a couple of people. In another guild management department, one of the guys said that the information gathering team was also lamenting that they needed more people, and it seemed like they needed to hire a few more E-rank hunters. The guy sitting at the main desk, specifically the second in command, said to send him one candidate. The guy at the computer started looking and saw that it was a rank E hunter who had fought monsters in the dungeon, evacuated a team of miners, and brought a wounded hunter out of the dungeon. The guys who saw that he had rank E were immediately surprised. But the second person in management started to say, "Don't they realize that it would be fine to take him to a big guild like ours and we can cover up one scandal?" At this moment, a guy asked if Hunter Suho had replied to their letter because the newcomer had already managed to get an invitation from the Black Turtles Guild and he must be happy. But the other guy turned around and told the leader that he had declined the offer, causing the leader to not be able to understand why. After all, this guy is just a rank E rookie, and he's turning down such a big guild. "I don't understand what's the point," the leader said. The other guy replied that Hunter Suho didn't want to join any guilds. The leader was angry with this kind of answer. He couldn't understand if this guy thought he was some S-rank hunter. "This isn't the end yet. We're sure that Suho himself will contact us soon. Sooner or later, he'll realize how difficult it is for a hunter without a guild." Suho, while in his apartment, began to look at the notifications that came on his phone. He realized that once he visited that dungeon, he had no shortage of guild invitations. A lot of people wanted to get their hands on him specifically, but everyone wanted to hire him as a porter or gatherer. He couldn't understand why there were so many. He figured it would be a hindrance to him and an even bigger hindrance to leveling up with the system, and there was no point in joining them right now. He didn't care what the guild wanted to do or who they wanted to get. He had better things to do. Turning to his sword, he began to ask Fang Rakan if he wanted to continue the conversation, the one they had started in the dungeon when he suggested combining the powers of Shadow and Fang. Fang Rakan couldn't understand how he could calmly utter such nonsense. Are you saying that a shadow can become an ally instead of an enemy? Only under one condition: if you bring me to the Fang Lord's other holy land. At this moment, Suho started to ask if he knew how to get there, to which Fang replied that he knew where all of the Fang Lord's holy lands were located, regardless of the distance. But he felt that the gate leading there had already disappeared, and what people call a dungeon breakthrough had most likely happened. Suho immediately realized that this holy place must be an open dungeon. An open dungeon is where creepy and very strong monsters dwell. When a dungeon breach forms in the abandoned gate, the monsters take over the land, turning it into a wasteland. At this moment, Suho, holding his phone in his hand, sent a message to his uncle that he would be gone for a while and not to worry. Even if he couldn't contact him right now, he needed to move out to seize even more power and raise his level as quickly as possible. A little later, Suho started to ask Beru if they had arrived at that place, to which he replied that it was correct. But at the parking lot, they noticed that it was forbidden to enter, and things were not good right now since the guild owned the place. Suho immediately realized that the entrance was forbidden and that the Hyena Guild was made up of people who used to be gangsters, so they were all scary. Beru started to say that he shouldn't listen to these lowly creatures because the young lord had better raise his level. While Fang was arguing with Beru, Suho got angry and asked them what they were doing there right now. I'm ready to go inside, and I'll use my power to do so. He started breaking the cameras with his power. Beru asked him, what about the guild? To which Suho replied that he had his own way out. As soon as he broke the last camera, it completely disintegrated into small pieces. Suho decided that if they did that, they wouldn't have any evidence. Beru added that his methods reminded him of the Overlord. Once inside, Suho couldn't understand why there was a blue mist in all the open dungeons. Beru began to explain that it was mana from outer space. It gathers through the dimension walls, causing a gap in the worlds. Because of this, the fog from the Holy Land where it was broke through the dimension and came to Earth. The creatures from the outside world are trying to punch a huge hole in the dimension to send their armies here. The more mana a creature has, the more it is affected by traveling through the dimension. Suho realized that the strongest ones would not be here yet. He should hurry up and raise his level before other hunters came here. At this moment, raising his head, he saw huge monsters in the trees. One of them was a razor-clawed Brigga, and the other was a black shadow Ramon. The Fang immediately started telling Suho that now was the time for him to show his strength, to which Suho replied that he could rely on him but wouldn't use him as his main weapon, causing Fang to be perplexed. Suho made a decision after much deliberation that it was time for him to fight the way he wanted to. He would use his fists, like he did in training, as a base for mid-range combat. The ruler's strength would be the support. To avoid being predictable, he would use different weapons. Using extraction, he would get more equipment to improve his skills and characteristics, leveling up on his own. Beru was absolutely thrilled with what he heard from his young overlord. Fang also realized that this was the power of the Shadow Lord's bloodline. The more enemies and the longer the battle dragged on, the stronger he became, using the demons and monsters he destroyed. At this moment, Suho decided that now that his intelligence scores were higher, he could summon 5 shadows. But at this moment, Beru said that it was insignificant compared to a great lord who could summon thousands. Suho blushed and ordered him to shut up. Going even further into the depths of the forest, Suho saw that they had come to the very place Fang was talking about. Fang began to say that there was a gate leading to the Holy Lands here, but now they were seeing some kind of strange warehouse. Suho noticed that even though it was late, there were still people here. He wondered if there was a special reason for them to stay late. After all, hunting monsters was better during the day. At that moment, a car pulled up to the workers and hunters who were inside. The car began to bring out people who were tied up by their arms and legs. Suho immediately realized that he was witnessing a kidnapping being performed right in front of his eyes. Beru supported him by saying that it looked exactly like what they were seeing. Beru began to address the young lord, saying that they were here illegally, so they shouldn't interfere. If they realized he had trespassed into their territory, his hunters would have reason to attack. But as soon as Beru finished speaking and turned around, he saw that Suho had disappeared. He couldn't understand where he had gone. Was he really going to go to those people? Suho, who grew up in the arms of a police officer father who specialized in violent crimes and a legendary firefighter grandfather, couldn't stay away. He grew up with a sense of justice, and in this moment, he couldn't stand idly by. Suho accelerated at full speed and began to approach the first hunter that was in his way. He had a deep habit of acting first and thinking later when it came to justice. At the same moment, Suho accelerated with all his might and hit that guy with his shoe. The shadows who were watching were completely shocked by what they had just seen. The other hunters, seeing that their comrade had just been kicked in the head, were also shocked. After the kick, that guy's face had slammed right into the ground, and the guys only saw a silhouette flying by, which was Suho. They couldn't understand who that guy was, but Suho realized everything that was happening at that moment because he realized that his body reacted faster than his brain. He realized that he had invaded another guild's territory illegally and now didn't know what to do. Putting on his shadow mask, he turned around and began to ask, "Are you really kidnapping people? What is your guild hyena doing?" The other hunters began to ask back, questioning what he was doing invading other people's territory and attacking them out of the blue. "It looks like you came here for us to destroy you." At the same moment, the other hunters started using their magic and enhanced equipment to deal with Suho. One of the hunters started attacking Suho, who successfully dodged all of his attacks. As he swung, Suho thought about what he had learned earlier. The average rank of the Hyena Guild members was D. He definitely didn't know their strength, so he shouldn't relax. Taking a swing, he hit one of the hunters with all his might, who flew away at an incredible speed. The other hunters, noticing the silhouette of their comrade flying away, couldn't understand what had just happened. Following this, Suho began to eliminate one by one the hunters who were approaching him from all directions. Beru, who was watching the battle, could not believe that the awakened ones who had reached the D rank by human standards were no longer competitors for Suho. Right now, the status window indicated that Suho possessed level 16. A little later, Suho decided to tie up all the hunters so that they wouldn't be able to leave the area while he went about his business. Beru beside him began to say that it was a graceful completion. Suho began to untie all the guys who had been kidnapped by the guild. They began to thank him for saving them. They also asked if he was from the Hunter Association. He replied that they could assume that he was. He said he would handle things here and they should quickly evacuate to safety. Once the guys got into the car and drove away, Suho couldn't understand why the guild was kidnapping people. At this moment, Fang started telling Suho that he was feeling something. Suho asked him, "Feel what?" Fang replied that that was why he asked him to come here. As soon as they reached the fence, they started to go inside the room. What Suho saw shocked him. He couldn't believe his own eyes. There were many cages inside the room. Beru also added that there was a sense of energy in the room, although it was very vague. Suho turned his head and saw a locked dog in the nearest cages, but he couldn't understand why the Hyena Guild was doing this. Fang added that it seemed to him that it wasn't a dog but a small wolf, the descendant of the king of beasts. "Lord Fang," Fang said. Hearing this, Suho couldn't believe his own ears. Fang went on to say that right after his defeat in the war with the Shadow Lord, Lord Fang had ordered the surviving descendant to be hidden in the shrine and guarded because he believed that if the blood ties were not broken, another Lord Fang would appear. He honestly admitted that he didn't expect to find a Fang Lord in this particular place. At this moment, Suho broke the shackles restraining the little wolf cub and, lifting him up in his arms, finished listening to the story about how the Lord hoped that his clan would not be interrupted. He seems to vaguely sense the Fang Lord's aura and has lost a lot of energy. "He will die if left like this," Fang said. Beru asked the young lord what he would do. Suho, after briefly thinking, replied that he thought there were only a few people there, but here was another one. He was angry now, realizing that there was one last one left that he should destroy. Turning his head around, he saw a demonic creature that began to tell Suho that trusting people was useless. The creature, calling him Brokey, said that he had survived. Suho immediately asked if they knew each other. Fang replied that he knew him. "This is the hunter of the descendant I told you about," Fang said. Brokey immediately began telling Fang that it had been a long time since they had seen each other, and that Rakan Fang was also alive, as he could see Fang Rakan. Immediately, Fang Rakan began to say that he hadn't forgotten that he had been sent to guard the descendant. "What were you doing all this time while that little wolf cub was in shackles?" Fang asked. Suho, holding the wolf cub in his arms, didn't have time to notice when Brokey ran up to him with incredible speed and asked, how dare he touch his property. Following that, Brokey struck hard with his tail, causing Suho to fly off to the side. Beru noticed this and began to shout if his lord was all right. The impact was so strong that Suho broke through the wall and crashed into the nearby containers on the street. Beru immediately flew over to him and started asking if his little lord was okay. Suho replied that it was the most painful blow he had taken in a while. I'm bleeding right now, but don't scream. My head is splitting from the sudden and loud noises, Suho said. Beru, hearing this, went on to say that when he first came here, he felt a vague remaining energy and was sure what it was. Itarim, he said. I felt Itarim's energy from this guy, Beru said. Fang and Brokey started listening to Beru, who turned to Brokey and asked if he knew what he had done to the Overlord's descendant. Brokey interrupted his story and began to explain that he knew how he, who had lost his sanctuary, managed to maintain such a level of strength. According to natural selection, the strongest survive. The survival of the weak is determined by the whims of the strong. The weak become food for the strong. It's a law of nature. Although this guy is quite weak, he belongs to the Fang Lord's bloodline and can be said to be the best source of nourishment. That's why I feed on it to gain strength and be as strong as I am at the moment. Periodically, I draw the energy of the Lord's descendant from this little wolf cub as well. After this story, Brokey vowed that once he was done here, he would definitely destroy Fang. At this moment, Suho raised his hand and said that death was proof of weakness, but Brokey interrupted Suho and told him that his body was fit for the strong. Just as Brokey continued to say that the next Fang Lord would be fit, Suho used his sword to attack Brokey with his strength. Beru took advantage of the moment, grabbed the little wolf cub, and began to carry it away from the battle site. Following that, the sword returned to Suho's hands. Once he was sure that the little wolf cub was all right, Suho also began to address Fang. I thought you were angry with me, but it's all right. However, I have a case with that guy too. After all, right now will be the first clash between Fang and Shadow. Right now, I finally found a lead leading to my father. At that moment, the notification system began to show our hero that he had received an assignment. The content of the assignment, an urgent hyena hunt. He must defeat the hyena to ensure safety. That's when Suho realized that he guessed who the guild was named after. Once the monster managed to create a guild by kidnapping people and how it was all related to Itarim, the other hunters in the guild who were connected to Suho started yelling for Brokey to release them. They said that this guy wasn't that easy and they would also help him fight him if he untied them. Suho, at the same moment, shouted out that he wouldn't stand silently by and watch. At this moment, Brokey attacked his guild subordinates and destroyed them with a single blow. Afterward, he started saying that if they thought he would need help to deal with this guy, they had forgotten their place. Immediately you become prey when you forget your place. Suho, seeing how he had destroyed his comrades, became extremely angry and began to approach the monster very quickly. As soon as he threw the first punch, his opponent immediately blocked it. Suho began to ask, "Did you really kill those people just because you were playing with them?" Brokey replied, "The strong lord it over the life and death of the weak. You think the strong need a reason to do whatever comes into their head." He followed that up with another blow, but our hero managed to dodge and jumped aside. Jumping up into the air, Suho started flying at Brokey from top to bottom. Along the way, he used his new skill that he had recently obtained, Stormblade. But these attacks were too weak, and Brokey began to ask, "Is this really all you can do? You're dishonoring the name of the owner of the Fang heirloom." Suddenly, from the other side, a sword flew straight at the monster, and the monster couldn't understand where such a hidden attack was coming from. Suho, who was standing in front of it, started waving his hand and controlling the sword, saying that this wasn't the end. Fang suddenly began to ask Brokey, "Why have you changed so much? After all, you originally swore your loyalty and honored Rakan, but now I don't understand why you've changed so much." Brokey questioned, "Why did I honor Rakan? I don't really have any respect for him. I was only afraid of his power. I didn't want to continue living such an insignificant life, and as soon as I got the chance, I decided to change everything with my own hands." Spreading out, he gave a powerful punch to Suho and said, "There's no time to worry about anyone else right now." As soon as the punch was executed, Suho felt all the pain and he felt like all his bones were broken. However, Suho began to remember something that had been long forgotten. "After all, when I think of my father, who right now could be fighting someone, I am filled with incredible strength. This strength gives me more understanding that I shouldn't give up." Gathering all his strength into one punch, he began to use the shadow technique, reinforcing his fists with armor. With all his might, he struck his opponent, for he couldn't lose to some pathetic monster right now. Beru, who was watching the battle, couldn't believe that his young lord was so strong at his young age. Fang Rakan, who was lying on the ground, began to remember the strength combined from the broken sword. Would he really be destroyed like this? The survival of the descendants and the future of the Fang all depend only on Suho right now, and he still wants to fight. He's still waiting for the battle. At this moment, the little wolf cub began to rise up. Even though it was very hard for him, Fang Rakan saw this and realized that the little wolf cub, Sir Rakan's descendant, was rising up. Disregarding the pain he was feeling, he noticed that Suho's fighting spirit inspired the little wolf cub. The last thing I can do is only help. I can pass on the remaining power in me to the descendant. At this time, Suho continued to fight, and although his opponent was very strong, our hero continued to hold back all of his blows. As soon as he was thrown aside, he began to slowly raise his head and looked at the monster that was slowly approaching him. As he lifted his head, he saw a notification in front of him, and the system was showing that he had hit points left. The monster came closer and closer, and with its terrifying aura said, "For a mere worm, you have good stamina." At this moment, it swung around to finally deliver the final blow and destroy Suho. But at this moment, the wolf cub, having gained strength, clawed at the paw of the monster that had just wanted to finish Suho off. Suho couldn't understand what had just happened and where the wolf cub had come from. As soon as the wolf cub completed its attack, he stood up in defense of the young Shadow Lord. Following that, the notification system showed that the Fang descendant was paying tribute to the player's fighting spirit and offered to accept him as an ally. Suho didn't realize if the Fang descendant was the wolf cub he had met earlier. "Do I really have to accept him as an ally?" The monster in front of them began to speak. "Is he really a descendant? Has he absorbed the magic power of the Rakan Fang?" Hearing this, Suho actually realized that this wolf had absorbed the power of the sword. It turns out that Rakan Fang sacrificed himself to save his pup. Suho had been trying to cooperate with the Fang from the beginning. After looking at the system notification, he decided that there was no reason to refuse and accepted the invitation, taking the Fang descendant as an ally. The notification system showed a new window. Data synchronization was now underway. Suho began to notice that something was entering his head. He began to see strange memories of his opponents sitting in a cave near a small wolf cub and saying that they would confront the Lord. After all, in this world, it is survival of the fittest, and we will lose a lot if we lose. We will surely become stronger for the future of the Fangs. Bringing his hand up to the wolf cub, he began stroking its head. A little while later, some strange creatures came to their cave, causing the little wolf cub to start shaking with fear. Young Fang began to ask those creatures why they wouldn't destroy him right here and now. The creature in front of him said that he thought this demonic beast was quite useful and had some good abilities. Touching him, the creature transferred some of its power and said it was choosing him now. Brokey's hyena is to collect people alive and deliver them to us. This power will help him get rid of unnecessary problems, of course, depending on how he uses it. Most likely, this power would be contrary to his desires. At this moment, Suho began to realize that these were the memories of a Fang descendant. These beings who put something in his head are the main instigators who are directly related to Itarim. The Fang descendant didn't want to take revenge on Brokey. He wanted to stop an enraged Brokey. If it had anything to do with their plot, it was necessary to defeat Brokey right here and now. But right now, Suho realized that he didn't have enough strength to defeat him. At this moment, the notification system began to show that an additional quest had opened with the appearance of a companion. The quest information was Monarch's Descendants quest. He must find the descendants of the monarch and make them his allies. The descendants of the monarch becoming allies is one of 8, due to the proximity with Fang's descendants. The bonding skill is formed. At this moment, the huge blue aura began to glow brightly, and Suho realized that something was happening here. Baru noticed that the young lord was undergoing a change, not the same as the lord. Brokey, seeing this, couldn't understand what it was. Flying towards Suho with all his speed, he swung, determined to stop everything right here and now. As soon as he swung, he struck with all his strength, causing everything in the vicinity to start collapsing. But the notification system began to show Suho that a skill was being created due to the connection with the Fang descendant. Right now, he had linked his strength together with the Fang's strength. This bonding skill is a level 1 beast transformation, consuming 1 mana per second. The Fang descendant is instilled into his body, strengthening his body and developing beast-like senses. Suho couldn't realize if he had absorbed the descendant this time. His body became light and very strong. He felt his senses sharpened. Everything became so unfamiliar and incomprehensible. It helped him move better, avoiding dangers. As soon as he dodged all the attacks, he kicked the monster with all his strength. The monster couldn't understand where he got such strength from and why he was losing right now. After all, if you look closely, this is the same kid who fought him a few minutes ago. He can't lose to some person right now. After all, he had spent a lot of effort to achieve and obtain the power he has. Baru, who was watching the battle, realized that the magical power had now jumped up a lot. The beast began to shout that he had no idea what kind of trick he was using, but there was no way he would lose to a human. After all, strength defines the difference between species. He should blame himself for being an inferior being called a human. At this moment, Suho began to use a skill and learn the skill of hand-to-hand combat. Baru, who was nearby, was angered that this beast was discussing the difference between species in the presence of a young lord. After all, there's no one higher than a shadow lord, and that means he's wrong. He's about to be finished now. As soon as the beast heard these words, it couldn't realize if this kid was really a shadow lord. At that moment, Suho jumped back and delivered a perfect and precise punch, which knocked his opponent into the ground. He still did not die and only continued to say that he had to become stronger. That's all he was interested in, just getting stronger. At last, he saw the silhouette of his master, Rakan. He was angry at himself for not being able to protect him. The little wolf said goodbye to his old friend with a heartfelt howl. When Suho noticed that Brokey the hyena had been defeated, he leveled up a few times. Little Wolf looked at the dead body of Brokey, feeling sad for his former guardian. It could not believe that it had come to this, that he had to kill his old buddy. Suho and Baru looked at the sad moment and were left speechless. Baru broke the silence, praising Suho for the remarkable job done while fighting Brokey. Suho, however, was unimpressed and asked Baru if he picked up on any energy from Itarim. When he was linked with Rakan's heir, he was able to check out all of his memories. He continued, saying that there were some hunters who attacked Brokey and the wolf, and upon defeating them, they put something in Brokey's eye that turned him evil. Suho wondered if these guys could be from Itarim, and what their objective might be. Baru, hearing this, replied that Itarim are the outer gods and don't concern themselves with trivial matters. They use their apostles to deal with the smaller stuff. But one thing was certain, if these hunters were planning something big, they were already on Earth. Suho was feeling confused and really wanted to know more about Itarim. That's when Baru chimed in, saying there was a way they could dig up some juicy gossip on Itarim. Suho was surprised to hear this, and Baru suggested that if he could devour Brokey's body, he could go through his memories as well. In addition, he'd be able to recover some of his powers, like killing two birds with one stone. Suho, totally puzzled, asked Baru when he gained this kind of ability. He then turned his head towards Rakan's heir, who was listening, and gave him a nasty look. Suho knew the pain the poor wolf was going through and asked him whether he would like to join him or be taken to a new place. The wolf acted jittery at first, but when Suho flashed him a grin, it seemed to calm him down a bit. The wolf then jumped on Suho with pure adoration, licking his face as a sign of trust. Suho brought out his Shadow Dungeon key and used it to open the Shadow Dungeon. He told Baru that for the information on Itarim, he was counting on him. The wolf could not understand where the portal led, but Baru, chomping on Brokey's corpse, was elated, knowing that his master was counting on him and that he could help in some way. Now, our guy made it to the Shadow Dungeon. Baru scratched his head, wondering why Suho bothered showing up at the dungeon instead of just chilling at home. Suho replied that he was worried about the wolf and wanted him to stay in the Shadow Dungeon. However, he was having a tough time making sense of things because the dungeon was the turf of Shadow's big boss, and bringing in another ruler's offspring might turn out to be a problem. Baru was surprised that Suho wanted to let Rakan's heir live in the Shadow Dungeon. Suddenly, a system notification popped up, showing that the wolf wanted Suho to give him a name. Suho was taken aback by this, as he had not given anything a name before, but the wolf had complete faith in him. So without hesitation, Suho came up with the name Gray, since the wolf had gray fur. Baru was disappointed in Suho's prowess in naming beings. Seriously, I'm with Baru on this one. But surprisingly, the wolf seemed to like the name and was ecstatic about it. The system notified Suho that Gray was now one of his teammates, and their trust level had increased. The system also designated part of the Shadow Dungeon as Gray's territory. Suho was concerned about Gray's well-being and wondered what he would eat in the dungeon. Baru told him not to worry, as Gray had a well-known bloodline and would manage to survive by hunting monsters. This explanation calmed Suho, knowing there were still some monsters lurking around from his previous visit. Gray was excited to get a new home filled with monsters and charged at them to hone his skills. In just one attack, he killed a goblin that had no chance of defending itself. Our boy was already at a different level. Meanwhile, Suho and Baru were sitting on a tree branch, observing Gray hunting numerous goblins. Suho admired his skills, even though Gray had just gotten his powers and was still new to them. The system then popped up, notifying Suho that he had been awarded the title of Wolf Slaughterer for killing Brokey and had been given additional ability points. Suho was perplexed about this title, as he believed Brokey to be a hyena. Nonetheless, Beru urged him to be enthusiastic about the accolades and not dwell on the oddities. Suho let it go, though he was still unclear about why the system had given him the quest to find the heirs of all the monarchs. Beru explained that the system worked in mysterious ways and was designed to make Suho stronger, but he also warned Suho to be cautious, as the system could have a hidden agenda. Suho did not understand, so Beru elaborated, explaining that in his father's system, the architect wanted to make Sung Jin Woo a new shadow monarch, expecting his soul to be crushed in the process. However, Sung Jin Woo stood his ground, defeated the system, and became the shadow monarch without letting it crush his soul. He became stronger without relying on the level system. Suho understood and questioned Beru if the system was preparing him to be the next Shadow Monarch. Beru replied that it could not be determined for certain, as there could only be one Shadow Monarch. Still, the system would guide Suho until its goal became clear. Reflecting on Beru's words, Suho opened his status window. He noticed that his class was still the weakest, despite having grown much stronger since the time he fought the Mistburns and gained powerful skills. He still considered himself weak, believing he would not have defeated Brokey without Gray's timely intervention. He resolved to complete all the quests as long as the system aligned with his goals. Jumping down from the tree, Suho asked Beru if he had managed to dig up anything on Itarim after consuming Brokey's body. According to Beru, he didn't find any apostles involved in brainwashing Brokey, but discovered that the humans behind the Hyena Guild were from a guild named Grim Reaper. This guild was responsible for kidnapping and delivering people to Brokey. Beru suggested that investigating the Grim Reaper Guild might reveal more clues about Itarim. Suho was shocked to learn that another guild was working with the Hyena Guild behind the scenes, complicating matters even further. The story then shifted to a phone call. A man sitting in a lavish office picked up the phone. He was talking to someone named Im Taegyu, who was in the middle of a raid. Taegyu asked about the man's involvement in the recent Hyena Guild incident. The man dismissed the notion and said Taegyu had no proof, even if he were involved. Taegyu warned him that the Hunter Association would get to the bottom of this and advised the man to clean up his act. Angered by the insult, the man smashed his table in a fit of rage. We then learn that he is the vice CEO of the Grim Reaper Guild. Smiling, he pulled out a pearl, a hunter awakening stimulant called Stardust, and reflected on how it could be a breakthrough for his business. Gray was tearing through the shadow dungeon, slicing down goblins like they were nothing. His growth was astonishing, so much so that even Beru, the seasoned warrior, was impressed. "You're getting stronger by the minute, Gray," Beru noted, pushing him to dig deeper to become the weapon Suho would one day rely on. Suho watched from the shadows, astonished by how swiftly Gray was leveling up. But what really caught his attention was the bond forming between Beru and Gray, a bond built on mutual respect and shared goals. Then something unexpected happened. A system message flashed before Suo's eyes. Suo has gained experience from Gray's hunting. Suo froze in shock. "How is that even possible?" he muttered, completely baffled. He turned to Beru, who was busy scratching Gray's back. "Beru, do you know anything about this? I just gained experience from Gray's kills." Beru approached, inspecting the system message. "It's similar to how your father gained experience through his shadow army. You're sharing the spoils of battle like in a game." Suho realized the pieces were falling into place. With shared experience, even if it's only 50%, that's still huge. Excitement bubbled up inside Suho. "Gray is going to handle the hunting from now on," he declared, eyes gleaming. Gray, overhearing, felt a wave of shock and exhaustion wash over him. Before he could process it, another system message appeared. "Dungeon cleared. New quest unlocked. Daily quest." "Finally!" Suho exclaimed, eager to see what the system had in store. The quest was simple: kill goblins and clear the dungeon. But Suho couldn't help but wonder why he was getting daily quests now. Then it hit him. Daily quests meant daily rewards, and that meant he could grow stronger every single day. Beru added his thoughts. "It seems like the system wants you to conquer this entire dungeon to make your domain." Suho nodded, but a new challenge presented itself. "How am I supposed to find 100 goblins in this massive place?" Suddenly, a plan formed in his mind. He opened his inventory and pulled out the horn flute from his last dungeon clear. The horn could summon nearby goblins. Without hesitation, Suho blew into it, and within moments, goblins came charging from every direction. Suho's adrenaline spiked as the goblins swarmed. "Perfect," he thought. Beru watched with approval, praising Suho's quick thinking. With a determined grin, Suho charged at the goblins, his fists smashing into their bodies with devastating force. Yet, as the battle raged on, he noticed the thrill was gone. Fighting goblins just didn't excite him anymore, but he had a quest to complete, and he would do it with style. He blew the horn again, summoning an even larger horde of goblins. Not content with just that, Suho raised the corpses of the fallen, summoning his own goblin army. What began as a fight had now escalated into a full-scale war. Gray, along with his shadow soldiers, drove into the fray, slashing through goblins with ruthless efficiency. For 3 relentless hours, they fought, turning the dungeon into a battlefield littered with goblin corpses. By the end, Gray was completely spent, collapsing to the ground in exhaustion. But Suho, seeing another system message, couldn't stop grinning. Quest complete. The message read, but Suho noticed something interesting. The count didn't stop at 100. It kept going. Could there be more rewards? Suho wondered, a wicked grin spreading across his face. What if I push this further? Gray, already drained, could barely fathom what Suho was planning, but they continued hunting down goblins until the system finally displayed the quest's completion status. Gray looked like his soul had left his body, but Suho was over the moon. His gamble had paid off, and he had unlocked hidden rewards. The system awarded him 3 stat points, a full status recovery, and 2 mysterious boxes, the Blessed Random Box and the Cursed Random Box. Suho was thrilled. The status recovery alone was worth it, providing a full heal just like leveling up, and the permanent stat increase was the cherry on top. But the 2 boxes posed a dilemma. Should he choose what he needed or what he wanted? After some thought, Suho decided to play it smart and choose what he needed. When he opened the blessed box, his eyes widened in disbelief. Vulcan's gauntlets, a weapon that boosted his attack by 40% and added 30% more physical damage. Unbelievable, Suho muttered, slipping the Vulcan's gauntlets on. I can't turn shadow soldiers into gauntlets forever, but these are broken. This is perfect. He couldn't wait to test them out. Just as he was about to dive back into the action, another system message appeared. Gray's status changed from admiration to fear. Suho's excitement faded. What's wrong? He asked, looking at Baru. Baru sighed, explaining, Gray is a living creature, Suho, not a shadow soldier with limitless stamina. Realizing his mistake, Suho nodded, feeling a twinge of guilt. We'll take a break. They exited the shadow dungeon, and Suho's mind was already shifting gears. We need to investigate the Reaper's Guild, but where do we start? His thoughts were interrupted by a phone call. It was Senior Lim, urgently asking for Suho's help. The scene shifted to Seoul Station Field, a dangerous zone where Suho met Lim, and Lim explained, my crew was supposed to show up for the hauler job, but no one's answering. I think they're dodging work after partying last night. Suho agreed to help, donning the protective cloth, a necessary precaution for handling monster corpses. Soon, the hunting party arrived, but their leader wasn't pleased with the lack of handlers. This dungeon was hard to secure from the Reaper Guild, the leader growled. If your lack of people causes any problems, I'm reporting it to the Hunters Association. Suho observed the situation carefully, noting that the leader, a healer, was the highest-ranked member of the group. The pieces began to fit together. Lim's call, the dungeon's connection to the Reaper's Guild, and the system guiding him towards something bigger. This wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. Meanwhile, deep within the dungeon, a group of shadowy figures watched a mist-covered monster conducting a mysterious experiment. Could this be the same dungeon Suho was about to enter? Suho braced himself. The real fight was just about to begin. The mages were ready, their fireballs crackling with energy, casting a glow that pierced the darkness of the dungeon. We've got a clear view now, one of them said, his voice steady yet tense. The party leader, a seasoned hunter with sharp instincts, quickly ordered his team to get into formation. The monsters were closing in, lizard-like creatures that hunted in packs, their eyes glowing with hunger. The battle was inevitable. The leader turned to Suho and Senior Lim. Stick close to the strike team, he ordered, his voice leaving no room for argument. Collect the bodies as soon as they fall. We can't afford to waste any time. Senior Lim frowned, clearly uncomfortable with the idea. You want us right in the middle of the action? He muttered under his breath, but the leader had already shifted his focus back to the advancing monsters. Suho, however, was lost in his thoughts. Lizard monsters, he mused. They're not exactly the challenge I was hoping for. Ever since he had received Vulcan's horn as a reward, he had been expecting a formidable opponent, something worthy of his growing power. Yet, he realized there was an opportunity here. Watching the hunters fight these lizard monsters could provide valuable insights into team combat, something he had rarely experienced, having always fought alone. As the strike team engaged the monsters, Suho crouched down and touched the cold, damp ground. Arise, he commanded softly, and from the shadows his army of goblins emerged. Suho couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. He could now summon 7 shadow soldiers, a sign of his increasing strength. The goblins swiftly set to work, collecting the bodies of the fallen monsters with an efficiency that astonished even Suho. Meanwhile, the hunters fought bravely, their weapons clashing against the tough hides of the lizard creatures. The leader, ever vigilant, noticed something odd as the battle wound down. Turning around, he was stunned to see that the collection work was already done. Suho's shadow goblins had completed the task in record time. "What are those?" the leader stammered, his eyes wide with disbelief. Suho, standing calmly amidst the chaos, simply smiled. "They're my summons," he replied, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Senior Lim, watching nervously, hoped the leader wasn't about to start another argument. But to their surprise, the leader grabbed Suho's hand, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "Join our strike team as an exclusive collection member," he said, his voice filled with enthusiasm. "I'll pay you top market salary." Suho blinked, taken aback by the offer. "I'm not planning to stay in collection work long term," he said, his voice measured. The leader, however, was not easily dissuaded. "Name your price," he insisted. But before he could continue, a team member rushed over, his face pale with fear. "Captain, we found something disturbing," the team member said, his voice trembling. The leader and his party followed the man to a small clearing where they found a human corpse, its body glowing with an eerie blue flame. Despite the flames, it was clear that the person had been dead for some time. The leader knelt beside the body, his face grim. "It's a human, all right," he confirmed, his voice heavy with concern. Suho and Senior Lim exchanged a glance. "Is this who I think it is?" Lim asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Suho nodded, his expression serious. "Yes, it's a Mistborn. I fought one before." Without hesitation, Senior Lim informed the leader, "Captain, this is a Mistborn, a powerful monster. They recently attacked our university, causing widespread panic. We need to be cautious." Before the leader could respond, more corpses were discovered, each one glowing with the same blue flame. One of the hunters suggested they halt their mission and report the findings to the Hunters Association. The leader paused, deep in thought. The bodies looked like ordinary humans, not hunters, and with several C-rank hunters in his party, he felt confident they could handle the situation. "We'll keep moving forward," he decided, his voice firm. One of the hunters, clearly eager for action, grinned and said, "I was hoping you'd say that." Suho, however, was uneasy. "The Mistborn are far more dangerous than you realize," he warned, but the leader dismissed his concerns. "I'm the captain here," he said sharply. "What I say goes. Now let's move." The party entered a dark, foreboding tunnel, the mages lighting the way with their fire magic. The flickering flames cast eerie shadows on the walls, and the air grew colder, heavier, as if the dungeon itself was warning them to turn back. Meanwhile, deep within the dungeon, screams echoed off the stone walls as blue flames licked at the bodies of those who had fallen victim to the Mistborn. 3 shadowy figures watched, their faces hidden behind masks. One, wearing a skull mask, grumbled, "The fire isn't strong enough. Our supply is running low." Another figure, resembling a giant rat, nodded. "We need to replenish our stock soon. The Hyena Guild was our main supplier, and now they're gone. If we don't find more firewood, our Stardust production will suffer." Suddenly, the skull-masked figure stiffened. "Humans are near," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Perfect timing. The rat-like creature grinned, revealing sharp, yellowed teeth. "I'll go get them," he said, dragging his sword behind him as he slinked into the shadows. Back in the tunnel, the hunters were fighting off another wave of lizard monsters. The leader, satisfied with their progress, took a moment to heal his team. "We've had a good haul today," he said, a rare smile on his face. The other hunters agreed, and one of them commented, "It was the right decision to keep going." The leader reached into his jacket and pulled out a marble. "This," he said, holding it up for all to see, "is Stardust. Have any of you heard of it?" The hunters gathered around, intrigued. Stardust was a rare and powerful substance known to boost a hunter's abilities for a short time. "Why didn't you show us this earlier?" one of them asked, eyes wide with excitement. "I was saving it for when we're in real danger," the leader replied, his gaze fixed on the marble. But as he admired the Stardust, he failed to notice the dark figure creeping up behind him. The rat-like monster struck with terrifying speed, shattering the leader's bones with a single blow. The Stardust fell to the ground, breaking into pieces. "He's not dead yet," the monster sneered, shocking the hunters with his ability to speak. The hunters, stunned and horrified, realized they were facing a high-level monster. The creature pointed his sword at them, counting their numbers with a cold, calculating gaze. "I don't need all of you," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "I'll play with the strong ones and kill the rest." Suddenly, the monster produced a marble of his own, another piece of Stardust. The hunters gasped, unable to believe what they were seeing. Not only could this monster speak, but it also possessed Stardust. "Let the game begin," the monster growled, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. The hunters charged, but the monster was ready. With a single powerful swing, he cleaved one of them in 2. He then turned his attention to the mage who had lit the tunnel. With ruthless efficiency, he cut the mage down, plunging the tunnel into darkness. The remaining hunters, blinded and panicked, were easy prey. The monster moved through them like a shadow, his sword slicing through the darkness with deadly precision. One by one, the hunters fell, their cries echoing in the cold, silent tunnel. When the slaughter was over, the monster grabbed the leader's limp body and began to drag him back to their hideout. "Firewood obtained," he muttered, leaving the others to either die or be consumed by their injuries. As the monster disappeared into the shadows, a system message appeared before Suho, notifying him of a quest arrival. This was the quest to rescue the survivors. Suho removed his mask, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the carnage. "What the hell just happened?" he whispered, his voice barely audible in the oppressive silence that followed. Seeing the confusion etched on Suo's face, Baru materialized from the shadows and asked if something was troubling him. Suho explained that a quest had suddenly appeared, warning of powerful monsters nearby who had captured the strike team. He gazed at the system screen, contemplating the rewards that hinged on how many lives he could save. The realization hit him. These people were in real danger. Without wasting another second, Suho spun around and shouted to Senior Lim that the strike team was in grave peril, urging him to exit the dungeon immediately. Senior Lim, baffled by Suho's sudden urgency, asked where this idea was coming from. Suho, determined, simply said that his instincts were screaming at him and to trust his judgment. Suho swiftly summoned two of his goblins, instructing them to escort Senior Lim out of the dungeon. But Lim, still in the dark, asked what Suho planned to do. Suho's response was as shocking as it was resolute. He was going after the strike team. Senior Lim, though taken aback, quickly understood and realized that he would only be a hindrance if he stayed. He promised Suho that as soon as he got out, he would return with reinforcements from the Hunter Association. Thanking Senior Lim for his understanding, Suho removed his protective suit and called Gray forth from his shadow. An unexpected move, since Gray was supposed to be locked away in the Shadow Dungeon, needing a key to be released. But there was no time for questions. The moment Gray appeared, Suho activated his bonding skill, transforming while donning his newly acquired Vulcan gauntlets. The sight was undeniably impressive. Suho looked ready for war. Turning to Beru, Suho ordered him to hurry as they both took off, racing toward the strike team's location. As they delved deeper into the dungeon, the silence was deafening, the tension palpable. Finally, they reached a door bathed in green light, where the metallic scent of blood hung thick in the air, staining the atmosphere ominously. Inside, a gruesome scene unfolded. Human bodies were carelessly tossed to the ground as a rat-like monster informed his companions that he had returned with firewood. One of his comrades remarked on his quick return, to which the rat monster nonchalantly replied that the humans were mere weaklings. Another of the creatures mentioned that the dungeon would soon open, allowing them to summon demons. As a reward for his efforts, the rat monster was to prepare the firewood, though he grumbled about the fairness of it all before setting to work. It became clear that the biggest of the three was the leader, with the rat monster being the youngest. The middle one, who seemed to be the brains of the operation, praised the rat monster's efforts for enabling them to produce stardust without any interruptions. He then elaborated, revealing that this stardust was a secret demon technique, a deadly concoction made by combining poison and an awakening stimulant derived from berserk poison. His eyes gleamed with a familiar cross. Much like Brokey, Iterim's handiwork was unmistakable. The middle creature continued explaining that while stardust could enhance a being's magical power, it came with a deadly cost. It devoured the user's life force. The technique for refining the stardust with the hellish flames of Mistborn had been provided by the Apostle, who had also taught them how to create monsters by corrupting souls. Suddenly, one of the monsters sensed something. Suho was closing in at an alarming speed. The trio tensed, puzzled by his approach, believing the rat monster had already dealt with all the hunters. Their confusion was cut short by Suho's dramatic entrance. He burst through the door with a powerful kick, sending it flying towards the monsters with incredible force. The rat monster, quick on his feet, sliced the door cleanly in half with his sword, narrowing his eyes at the intruder. Suho and Beru made a grand entrance, but before Suho could utter a word, the sight before him left him stunned. 3 demons stood before him, burning Mistborn, tied to stakes as if performing some twisted ritual. His thoughts raced, but they were abruptly interrupted by a system alert confirming that the number of survivors hadn't changed. Yet there was no time to process this. A sword suddenly sliced through the air, aimed straight for his neck. Suho barely dodged it, arching backward just in time. The rat monster who swung the blade was visibly surprised by Suho's agility. Undeterred, Suho demanded to know if this creature was responsible for the hunters he'd found slaughtered on his way in. Before the rat could respond, Suho landed a powerful punch, sending the monster flying back, though the rat managed to absorb some of the impact with his sword. Recognizing Suho's strength, the demon boss and the middle one realized that the rat couldn't handle Suho alone. Without hesitation, they pulled out Stardust and consumed it, boosting their magical power. Suho was locked in close combat with the rat when he sensed another threat. The boss was barreling towards him, his massive arm poised for a devastating punch. The rat monster stepped aside, giving the boss a clear shot. Suho acted on instinct, executing a perfectly timed backflip to evade the punch, but he landed straight into another trap. The middle demon had been charging up energy, and the moment Suho landed, he unleashed it, electrocuting him. Pain racked Suho's body, but before he could recover, the rat monster closed in, ready to strike with his sword. Despite the searing pain, Suho gathered enough strength to summon his shadow goblins, catching the monster trio off guard. The goblins, with menacing expressions, charged at the rat monster, momentarily distracting the middle demon. Seizing the opportunity, Suho grabbed the middle demon's arm and hurled him away with all his might. The middle demon, regaining his balance, asked the boss if this was the same power they had witnessed years ago when the demons were decimated by that man. The boss confirmed it, but added that Suho was far weaker than the Shadow Monarch they had feared. Together they could take him down. With renewed strategy, they joined forces and quickly obliterated Suho's Shadow Goblin army. Fury boiled within Suho as he watched the Shadow army fall. He realized that reviving the goblins would be pointless. They simply weren't strong enough. Individually, the trio wasn't as powerful as Brokey, but when they combined their strengths, they became a formidable force. The scene shifts to earlier that day when Baru asked Suho why he hadn't yet revived Brokey as a shadow soldier. Baru had consumed Brokey's corpse and could access his memories, but Suho hadn't taken the next step. Suho explained that after witnessing Brokey's final moments, it didn't feel right to him. Brokey had been a puppet of Itarim, and before turning him into a shadow, Suho wanted Gray's permission. Suddenly, Gray approached Suho with a gentle smile, granting his permission. Gray wanted to be reunited with his friend, even if it was in death. Back in the present, Suho used the dungeon key on his shadow and activated his shadow extraction skill. A massive wave of shadow energy surged toward the shadow dungeon as Suho called out, "If you want your revenge, I'll give you the chance now. Arise." With that command, Suho summoned his first powerful shadow general, Brokey. The massive figure rose, towering before the monster trio. Even at level 1, Brokey's presence was terrifying, and he let out a roar that echoed through the dungeon. The middle demon's eyes widened in shock as he recognized the shadow. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Brokey had returned, and the man who had defeated him stood right before them. Beru, not wanting to be left out, quipped that the numbers were even now with Brokey and himself on Suho's side. Suho's expression was cold and resolute as he declared, "It's time to play the game." With that, he and Brokey charged at the demon trio, signaling the start of an epic battle. Meanwhile, the dungeon, which had initially been bathed in blue light, suddenly shifted to a menacing red. Everyone knew what that meant. Something big was coming. As the battle raged on, a figure approached from the shadows, but whose side was she on? Suho's backup or reinforcements for the demon trio? The answer would soon reveal itself in the chaos of the fight. The lady staring at the chaotic fight unfolding before her was none other than Aesiel. She blinked in confusion, wondering how she ended up here. Did some demon summon me for a sacrifice, or just for target practice? She thought, still puzzled. But then her expression shifted dramatically when she realized what was happening. More importantly, who was fighting grabbed her attention. She could hardly believe her eyes. A shadow soldier locked in fierce combat with a demon. This day just got weirder. Meanwhile, Suho and the youngest demon were busy playing Clash of the Titans, their weapons ringing out against each other. Suho's trusty Vulcan's gauntlets made him look like the world's coolest brawler, easily blocking the demon's sword strikes and even swatting them aside like a fly. Then, spotting a rare opening, Suho unleashed a devastating kick right into the demon's gut. The poor demon gasped like someone who'd just eaten the world's spiciest chili and let out a yell that probably hurt his pride more than anything else. With one demon reeling, Suho surged forward, ready to finish the job so he could focus on the other two. But just as he was about to land the knockout blow, something bright and crackling came his way. "Oh, great, an electric surprise," he thought as he narrowly dodged the attack, creating some much unwanted distance between him and the rat monster. Turns out, the middle demon wasn't just standing around for moral support, he launched the attack to save his younger buddy. So this is a family business, Suho thought sarcastically, not thrilled about the interruption. The middle demon shouted to the rat monster, "Stay sharp! One wrong move and you're toast." Suho sighed in frustration. One demon could have been down for the count, but he knew these demons had to be running the ultimate tag team. He acknowledged that their combo attacks were more than a little annoying, and with his mana slowly draining thanks to his bond with Gray, Suho knew if this dragged out any longer, he'd be in trouble. Even Brokey, his shadow soldier, was struggling against the boss demon, his power nowhere near what it used to be. Suho was desperately trying to figure out how to split up the demons for some one-on-one action when, bam! The answer arrived in the most unexpected way. Out of nowhere, Esiel leaped into the fray, landing squarely between Suho and the demons, leaving both sides scratching their heads in confusion. In a commanding voice, she demanded, "Where is Mr. Sung Jinwoo? Spill the beans or face the consequences." Suho blinked in surprise. "Wait, she's looking for my dad." He had no idea who she was, or more importantly, why she looked like she just walked out of a disaster zone. Meanwhile, Beru, Suho's ever-loyal shadow ant, wore the most disappointed expression a giant insect could muster. He approached Esil and, with all the restraint he could manage, asked, "What are you doing here? Why did you come?" Esil's face lit up as she recognized Beru's voice. With zero regard for the seriousness of the situation, she grabbed the tiny ant in a joyful hug. "I can't believe it, Beru. You're here too," she squealed, her tone way too cheerful for the middle of a battle. She gave him a once-over. "Wait a minute, where's the rest of you? Why are you so small and cute?" She beamed, clearly unfazed by Beru's lack of a towering presence. The questions just kept coming. "Where's Mr. Sung Jinwoo? And who's that other human guy over there? Is he your new friend?" she asked, pointing to Suho, who now looked like his brain had short-circuited from all the confusion. Beru, on the verge of losing his cool, managed to keep his response to a single line, "It's a long story." The two demons exchanged baffled glances, wondering who the heck this lady was. After a solid 3 seconds of staring, they concluded, "Yep, she's the one we're going to sacrifice for that sweet stardust." The middle demon, always the brains of the operation, pointed out, "Wait, if she knows our enemies and joins their side, things could get real messy." Meanwhile, Esil, our ever-cheerful girl, was just thrilled to see her old pal Beru, and if Beru was here, Jinwoo had to be doing fine too, right? What crisis? This was basically a reunion. But Beru, ever the buzzkill, interrupted her excitement, saying, "Hey, we can swap stories later. Right now, we're kind of in the middle of a battle, and since you're here, mind helping us out?" He praised her timing like she'd just delivered pizza to a party, then casually ordered her to deal with the demons in the back. Asil blinked, her expression screaming, "Wait, what?" Suho, on the other hand, was still trying to figure out what planet he'd landed on. Just standing there, lost in his confusion, the demons, not exactly patient types, decided to strike first. The middle demon grinned wickedly. "Let's go for the lady first. She's injured, and we need her blood for Stardust anyway. Priorities, right?" Finally, Suho chimed in, his face lighting up with some faint memory. "Wait, I think I remember her from somewhere, but I'm not sure where," he added, scratching his head. "She's injured, though. Can she really take on these demons?" Beru, however, was brimming with confidence. "Don't worry. Low-ranking demons like these are no match for her. She's a noble demon, Esil, eldest daughter of the later household, spared by the Shadow Monarch when he destroyed the demon world. In human terms, her powers rival an S-rank hunter." Suho's jaw dropped. An S-rank? He could barely contain his excitement at the prospect of seeing an S-rank hunter in action. But before he could finish that thought, reality stepped in hard. The youngest demon charged Esil and with one swift blow, knocked her out cold. Her weapon went flying and she skidded across the ground like someone who forgot how friction works. Suho and Beru just stood there, blinking in disbelief. This was not S-rank material. Their faces couldn't have looked more disappointed if they tried. Aciel, lying face down in the dirt, slowly dragged herself back to Suho and Beru like someone trying to exit the world's worst party. Beru, struggling to hide his irritation, leaned over. "What's wrong with you? How did you become so weak? Even your mana levels are in the gutter." Tearing up, Aciel sniffled. "It's not my fault. Half a year ago, there was a rebellion. My household fell, and while I was running, they took my blood and my powers." She sniffled again, then, with full crybaby energy, looked up at Beru. "Can you lend me some of your power?" "Clearly," she whimpered. Beru didn't even bother replying. He just turned around with the most disappointing dad look ever, making Esil pout like a child denied candy. "You're so mean," she whined, while Suho just stared, deadpan. "Great, now I have two people who've lost their powers. Fantastic!" Suddenly, the boss demon, listening in on their little sob story, chuckled darkly. "Did you guys hear that?" He stepped forward. "No wonder I didn't recognize her. She's from the later household, huh? A survivor. If we consume her blood, we'll become even stronger. Yes. Back to square one, Suho groaned. If only I could fight them one-on-one, I'd take care of them easily. But then Beru, ever the strategist, raised his glowing hand with a smirk. I've got a terrific idea, he said as red energy flared around him. I've recovered some mana, time to put it to good use. He used his skill, Harsh Orders, on Essel, and a red aura flowed into her. Her stats got a 50% boost, but as a fun side effect, she also got slapped with a curse of insanity. Beru, clearly enjoying this too much, pointed at the demons. Go get him, you worthless demon. Issel, now berserk and foaming at the mouth, charged at the demons like a raging bull, fury in her eyes. Suho stood there, wide-eyed, his internal monologue spiraling out of control. She looks absolutely miserable, but hey, if it gives us a shot at a one-on-one fight, I'm okay with it. Suho then commanded Brokey to engage the demon boss, while Isiel, in full crazy mode, went after the middle demon. As she fought, the rat demon suddenly jumped into the fray, swinging his sword toward her. But Suho, in a rare heroic moment of clarity, dashed in to save her, locking the rat demon's head in his arms like he was about to perform a wrestling move. With a burst of momentum, Suho hoisted the demon up and with a mighty heave tossed the creature straight into the Mistborns that were on fire. The rat demon crashed right into them and predictably caught fire himself. The screams that followed, well, they weren't pretty, but Suho wasn't done yet. Grabbing the demon's sword, he slashed the rat in two, finally finishing him off for good. And with that, Suho stood victorious, while Isil, still berserk and probably not quite sure who she was anymore, continued to charge at anything that moved. A system pop-up appeared, announcing that Suho had killed a low-ranked demon and leveled up almost instantly. Another message flashed before him. His Vulcan gauntlets had devoured the demon's soul, increasing his physical damage by 31%. The upgrade settled into his bones like a rush of adrenaline, and he could feel his strength growing. Meanwhile, Aesel fought like a woman possessed, relentlessly attacking the middle demon. Her strikes were wild and merciless, and the demon, despite his strength, couldn't shake her off. He then realized with sinking dread that the rat monster had been killed. But before he could even fully process that, a system message appeared. Aesel had exhausted her energy. The effects of Harsh Orders had worn off. The moment the skill ended, Aesel collapsed face first into the dirt. The middle demon froze, surprised by her sudden fall. But before he could make his move toward her, Suho appeared like a shadow in the night and put the demon into a headlock, his grip as unyielding as iron. Suho twisted the demon's neck with brutal efficiency, snapping it with a sickening crunch. Another message popped up. He had leveled up again, and his gauntlets had once more devoured a soul. 2 down. The boss demon, now alone, was enraged. With an earth-shaking roar, he lashed out at Brokey, the impact sending the shadow soldier flying into the dungeon wall. Dust and debris exploded from the impact, and the ground trembled beneath Suho's feet. The demon, realizing that he was now outnumbered, cursed his fallen comrades. Useless, completely useless. He was surrounded, Brokey on one side, Suho on the other. But instead of focusing on Brokey, he made a snap decision. His gaze locked onto Esiel, lying unconscious and defenseless on the ground. She was the key. Her blood could make him stronger. With a surge of desperate energy, the boss demon charged toward her. But Suho wasn't about to let that happen. With a swift, punishing kick, Suho smashed into the demon's arm with such force that it bent at an unnatural angle, cracking the floor beneath them. The demon howled in pain, his attack completely halted. Suho stepped forward, his face calm but deadly, and with a smirk he said, "You're up then." Without even needing to finish the job himself, he gave the order. "Brokey, take him." Brokey lunged, his fangs gleaming, and with a vicious, lethal attack, tore into the boss demon. The demon's final scream echoed through the dungeon as his life ended. A barrage of system messages flooded Suho's vision. Another level up and the ability to use store purchase had unlocked now that he was above level 20. Suho took a deep breath as the bonding skill with Gray disengaged, and he opened the system to see what this new feature was all about. As he scrolled through the options, Isil began to stir, groaning in pain. She sat up, shooting a death glare at Beru. "That pathetic skill nearly killed me," she snapped. Then, turning to Suho, she pointed accusingly. "And who's this? Another human who can command shadow soldiers other than Sung Jinwoo?" Beru, as calm as ever, tilted his head and replied, "As I suspected, you aren't loyal enough to the Shadow Monarch. Maybe try a little harder to remember who could possibly be the best candidate." Issel's eyes widened as the realization struck her like a bolt of lightning. Her expression changed entirely. Tears welled up in her eyes as she stared at Suho, the truth sinking in. "He's the young monarch!" Isel squinted, her voice quivering with disbelief. He's the young monarch, isn't he?" she whispered, her eyes glued to Suho. Suho froze, surprised by the sudden recognition. His gaze sharpened as he turned to her, confusion flashing across his face. How on earth did she know who I am? Did she really just call him the young monarch? Before he could ask, the sound of laughter echoed from the corner. Brokey and Gray were indulging in their own carefree moment, oblivious to the tension. Issel's voice wavered, heavy with emotion. I didn't recognize you. You're so different now. Tears welled up in her eyes as she blinked at him. You look exactly like your father, the Shadow Monarch. Then, as she was saying something, her lips trembled. As the words left her mouth, she collapsed, her body going limp. A wave of shock rippled through the room. Suo's eyes widened as panic flickered on everyone's faces. He quickly gestured toward Beru, urgency in his voice. Beru, check her! Is she all right? Beru stepped forward, shaking his head in his typical dramatic fashion. Leaning over Esil's unconscious form, he scrutinized her before shrugging casually. She's not dead, just tired. Exhaustion's got the best of her. His casual assessment was oddly comforting. No need to worry, she's just out of energy. Relieved, Suho's focus shifted back to the hunters they had rescued. He ordered Beru again, his tone now firm. Heal them just enough so they live. I don't want any deaths under my watch. As Beru tended to the wounded, the system chimed, announcing that Suho's quest had been completed. A small smile tugged at Suho's lips. Mission accomplished. Dusting off his hands, he glanced over the 7 survivors, feeling a rush of satisfaction. Saved them all. The system flashed again, this time rewarding him with 3 ability points and, 700 gold. His eyebrows shot up. Gold, he muttered incredulously. I got gold. Still processing it, he opened the system store. Ah, so this gold can be used to buy stuff. He browsed through the items with growing curiosity. Potions, weapons, tools, the options were endless. He chuckled softly, nostalgia creeping into his thoughts. Just like when I was younger, finishing chores and getting pocket money. Except now it's my dad giving me the gold through the system. The thought warmed his heart. Esil, meanwhile, lay unconscious on the cold floor. Suho bought a low-grade potion from the system and frowned as he read its description. Recovers 500 HP, but only for me. Suho glanced at the unconscious demon girl and, ignoring the restrictions, decided to try it anyway. Beru, should I just give it to her? Without waiting for a reply, Suho carefully poured the potion into Il's mouth. Slowly, her breathing steadied and color returned to her face. Beru, watching, raised an eyebrow in disbelief. Gold on a demon? He muttered. The young monarch, you're too generous. Suho sighed, already preparing to wrap things up. We can't leave her here like this. Let's take her to the shadow dungeon with us. His attention shifted to Brokey. Bring the corpses of the demons too. Without hesitation, Brokey started dragging the grotesque bodies of the fallen demons, while Gray gently carried Asil through the portal. As Suho stared at the sword of the rat monster in his hand, Beru's voice pierced his thoughts. Why aren't you going to the shadow dungeon too? Suho's grip tightened on the sword. I still have something to finish here. He turned to face the Mistborns, their twisted forms writhing in agony, still engulfed in flames. His heart sank with the weight of their suffering. I can't leave them like this, he thought, and with a swift motion, he ended their misery, striking them down one by one. Sorry, it's the only mercy I can offer, he whispered, his head bowed in regret. Outside the dungeon, chaos brewed at Soul Station, where the Hunter Association had gathered. Among them was a top-ranked hunter, his expression cold as he demanded a report. Tell me what you found inside. A junior member stepped forward. We found several corpses, thorn lizards and mistborns, but the dead hunter's wounds don't match the monster's attacks. There was also a room completely wrecked, covered in sword marks. The hunter's eyes narrowed. Something else was in that dungeon besides the monsters. As he mulled over the information, Senior Lim caught his attention. Suspiciously attempting to slip away unnoticed, Lim, the hunter, barked. Lim flinched but turned to face him, pretending innocence. You reported the incident, right? And there was another member with you. Suho, wasn't it? Where is he? Senior Lim hesitated, his expression unreadable. Then, with a forced grin, he answered, Suho. After we left the dungeon, he ran off, too scared to handle it. Poor guy, he's just an E-rank hunter. We didn't stand a chance, so I called for help. The hunter stared hard at Lim, clearly unconvinced. But instead of pushing further, he patted him on the shoulder. You did well, Lim. You followed protocol. With that, he turned to his team and barked, Keep searching. Don't miss a thing. Relieved, Lim exhaled deeply, glancing at the sky. Suho saved everyone, he thought, grateful. Whatever his reasons for keeping quiet, I trust him. Back in the shadow dungeon, Suho, Beru, and the others regrouped. Asil, now awake, had just been filled in on everything. Jinwoo's battles, the invasion of the outer gods, and Suho's awakening. I can't believe Sung Jin Woo still fights after everything he's been through. Beru nodded solemnly. The Shadow Monarch never rests. He sent me to break Suho's seal, but our young monarch, he didn't need me. He's already stronger than we imagined. Suho turned to Essel, his curiosity piqued. Have we met before? Esel's eyes lit up with excitement. Yes, during the tutorial your father made for you. Don't you remember me? Suho scratched his head, his memories fuzzy. He struggled to recall until it hit him. Wait, you're the one who surrendered the moment you saw me, aren't you? Beru snorted in amusement. You couldn't even complete a simple task, he scoffed, much to Essel's embarrassment. Flustered, Esel fell silent, her cheeks burning with shame. Beru's tone shifted, his voice now low and serious as he addressed Essel. What happened to you in the demon realm? How did you become so weak? Essel's face darkened with sorrow, her eyes reflecting a deep pain. I assume the young monarch has heard how Lord Sung Jin Woo defeated the demon tower and left the Leveling household in charge of it. Yes, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. We held it safe for years, waiting for the Shadow Monarch to call upon us. But decades passed, and that call never came. For a time, we lived in peace. Her voice trembled as she continued. But half a year ago, everything changed. It all started when something called stardust, a stimulant that amplifies magic, began circulating among the demons. Suho's eyes widened, recognition dawning. He had heard that name before, during his battle with the earlier demons who had consumed it just before they fought. Stardust. So that's what it was, he thought. Essel's voice turned bitter. It has little effect on high-ranking demons, but for the low-ranking ones, it gives them power without any cost. It was a gift and a curse. With the Shadow Monarch gone for so long, these low-ranking demons saw it as their chance. They grouped together and rebelled against the Leveling household. Her words became heavier, her hands trembling as she relived the trauma. That rebellion grew into a full-blown war. We fought. My family fought, with all we had to protect the demon castle, the very place entrusted to us by the Shadow Monarch. But we grew weaker with every passing day. Tears welled in her eyes, her body shaking. Eventually, we lost. They slaughtered us. Every last member of my household was sacrificed. I only survived by chance, but even then, they drained so much of my blood, I lost my powers. Her voice cracked as tears spilled down her cheeks. How could I face the Shadow Monarch now, after everything, after losing everyone? The weight of her grief filled the air, suffocating in its intensity. But suddenly, Suo's voice cut through the tension, his tone firm but gentle. You did great. Essel's tear-streaked face lifted, her eyes wide with disbelief. She searched his face, unsure if she heard him right. Suho stepped closer, his voice full of sincerity. You fought for your household, for my father, with everything you had. You stood your ground even with your life on the line. If my father were here, he'd say the exact same thing. You did great. A warm smile broke across his face, and he thanked her deeply, his gratitude clear. Thank you, Essel. Thank you for everything you and your people did. You fought for my father until the very end. For a moment, Essel was speechless, her mind reeling from his words, but then her disbelief gave way to something else. Hope. Suho's gaze hardened with determination. And now, I'll do my best to help you. We'll make the Leveling household rise again. We'll bring it back to the top. Tears filled her eyes once more, but this time they weren't from despair. With a small, trembling smile, she whispered, The household name is Leveling, young monarch. Before she could say more, the system chimed. A message popped up in front of Suho, startling him. This time, it was different. The system informed him that the last survivor of the demon nobility had expressed her thanks and asked a question that made his heart skip a beat. Would you recruit her as a teammate? The system suddenly popped up with a message that made Suho pause. The last survivor of the pure-blooded nobles, Essel Radiru, was thanking him. It then asked if Suho would like to recruit the descendant of the White Flames as his companion. Suho, Beru, and Essel were relaxing, everything seemingly calm, but the moment Suho read the notification, his face twisted in shock. Essel, the descendant of the second monarch? He could barely process it. Essel, noticing his strange expression, asked if something was wrong, looking slightly panicked. Suho's mind raced. Was this because she's the last pure-blooded demon noble? His surprise quickly melted into a mischievous grin. Well, this just got interesting, he muttered, and with a sly smile he accepted Essel as his companion. As soon as he did, the system bombarded him with more notifications. It announced that Suho had officially recruited the descendant of the White Flames, and even better, a new bond skill had been created, Demon Strike. The skill would allow him to channel Essel's energy into a devastating attack. Essel, however, was clearly not expecting this. She let out a shocked shout as her own system window appeared, leaving her completely confused. Calm down, Suho said, trying not to laugh. He turned to Beru. So it seems the system shows up for my companions too. No wonder Gray never mentioned anything. He can't talk, Beru nodded, trying to contain his amusement. That explains a lot. But this also means Essel really is the White Flame's descendant. Essel, still baffled, stared between them. Wait, descendant? What are you two even talking about? Me? A descendant? Ignoring her questions for the moment, they all decided to test out their new skill. Suho turned to Essel, giving her a nod. Ready to give this everything you've got? We need to see what this skill can do. Essel, clearly not feeling very confident, Kate agreed hesitantly. Yeah, sure, I guess, but no promises. The system notified Suho that the skill was now activated. As the process began, Essel's purple hair turned into a mystic white, her entire appearance shifting into something straight out of a ghost story. She now looked like an ominous spirit, her mana gathering into a ball of pure energy. That energy quickly flowed into Suo's fist, catching him off guard. Well, that's new, Suo thought, glancing at his charged hand. At the same time, Essel collapsed to the ground, returning to her normal form. Suho smirked. I have to admit, the evil spirit look kind of suits you. Essel? Suho called out, noticing she was looking like a wreck. She lay there pale, as if she had just survived a week-long flu. With a weak voice, she managed to apologize. I'm sorry, Suho. I used up all my energy. I can't even stand. Suho, nodding, reassured her. Take it easy. Rest up. His mind was racing with excitement. If this skill drains her completely, it must be crazy powerful. Can't wait to see what it can really do. He clenched his fist, already fired up. Essel, still lying on the ground like a lifeless frog, stared at him, thinking, at least now I can transfer all my energy to him. Maybe I'll actually be useful. Suho, pumped with all that energy in his fist, punched the nearest wall, expecting a massive impact. But when the dust cleared, the result was underwhelming. There was a tiny dent, a sad little mark on the wall. Both Beru and Suho stared at it in complete embarrassment. That's it? They both thought. Beru, scratching his head, finally broke the silence. This looks no different from your regular punch. Suho sighed deeply. Yeah, this is nowhere near as strong as my bond skill with Gray. Just like that, Gray jumped in, mocking Isel with a smirk. What a loser, he jeered. Isel, humiliated again, shrank into herself. Her mighty energy could barely dent a wall. Suho, refusing to give up, rechecked the skill description and had a sudden realization. Wait, it says the charge rate is at 0%. No wonder it didn't work. It never mentioned how to charge the skill. Realizing they were at a dead end, Beru seized the opportunity and turned to Suho. I have a request, he said, motioning to the demon corpses scattered around. Could I eat those demon corpses? You know, since you brought them here for the dungeon. Suho immediately shook his head. No, I'm going to make them into shadow soldiers. Beru shrugged. Then you better hurry up. You know shadow soldiers weaken the longer they stay dead. Realizing Beru had a point, Suho agreed. He raised his hand toward the three corpses and used shadow extraction. Arise, he commanded. Nothing. Not a flicker. Another fail. The system notified him that the demon corpse's mana was contaminated, preventing shadow extraction. Suho groaned in frustration. Great, another blunder, he informed Beru of the situation. Beru nodded thoughtfully. Even the Shadow Monarch couldn't extract shadows from tainted demons. That's why he had to control them through contracts like he did with the Thiradiru household. Aciel, who had been sitting quietly, flinched at the mention of her corrupt household. She didn't dare say anything, though, not wanting to face further humiliation. Seeing no use for the corpses, Suho finally sighed. Fine, Beru, you can eat them. Satisfied, Beru nodded and got to work. Afterwards, Suho approached Essel and handed her a potion. Here, this will help patch you up. Also, since you don't have anywhere to stay, you can crash in the Shadow Dungeon for now. Isel blinked, taken aback by his kindness. I've been nothing but useless to you. This is too much, she muttered. Suho smiled warmly. Don't worry about it. We're companions now. You can relax a bit. Just then, the system chimed in again, announcing that a section of the dungeon had been designated for the White Flame's descendant. Aciel Radiru was now officially the master of her own area. Suddenly, Beru let out a sharp cry, startling both Suho and Aciel. Suho immediately turned around, concern flashing in his eyes. What's wrong? He asked, tension thick in his voice. Beru, still chewing on his latest snack, responded slowly, I've uncovered something important. He swallowed and continued, his tone darkening. I learned something from the memories of these demons. Suho's expression instantly hardened as he realized the weight of Beru's words. There was a dead silence as Beru mentioned the apostle of the Iterim. Suho, Aciel, Gray, and Brokey all sat down in front of him, knowing that what Beru was about to reveal could change everything. Beru's eyes narrowed. I've finished consuming the demons, and I've gained a lot of information. But before I explain about the Iterim, you need to know this. Stardust is being distributed all over Earth, not just in Hell. And those mistborn creatures, they're monsters from outer space. Both Essel and Suho froze in place. Essel's eyes widened in horror. Stardust is on Earth too? She stammered. The revelation rocked her to her core. Suho, meanwhile, struggled to accept the fact that the Mistborns were from outer space. This wasn't just about hell anymore, it was far bigger than they had ever imagined. Beru pointed at Brokey, his tone colder than ever. By sheer coincidence, Brokey was involved too. But it wasn't just him. The entire Hyena Guild is connected. He raised his hand, casting shadowy images in the air, a visual display of the horrific truth. The demons were supplied with humans from the Hyena Guild. Those humans were then infected, transformed into Mistborn, and once these Mistborns were created, they became the core ingredient for Stardust. Suho's heart raced as Beru continued outlining the dark web of connections. There are multiple locations manufacturing Stardust. These places are known as Stardust factories. Beru's voice was steady, unflinching as he explained. The Hyena Guild kidnapped the humans. The Reaper Guild took those people to these factories. The factories then used the ingredients from the Mistborns to mass-produce Stardust. Beru connected the dots, his gaze fixed on Suho. The Itarim is behind this. There's no doubt. Suho felt the weight of those words sink into his chest. Itarim, the invasion. It's all connected. His thoughts spiraled, but before he could process them, Beru spoke again, delivering another blow. There's a human behind this entire Stardust operation. Someone designed the entire system. Suo's eyes widened in disbelief. A human? How could a human orchestrate all of this? Beru's voice dropped, his next words chilling. This human is the apostle of the Itarim, and they're already here on Earth, hiding. Suo could barely breathe, but Beru wasn't finished. That's not all, he added. There's another human helping the apostle, a high-ranking one. It's none other than the vice guild master of the Reaper Guild, Lee Min-sung. If we investigate him, we might uncover the apostle's whereabouts. The scene shifted to the outside of the Hunters Association building, where a mass of reporters had gathered, clearly awaiting something big. Their attention shifted sharply as a figure emerged from the building. Lee Min-sung, the vice guild master of the Reaper Guild. As Lee made his way through the crowd, reporters swarmed him, bombarding him with questions. What happened with the investigation on the Reaper Guild? One shouted. Are you aware of the Hyena Guild's kidnappings? Another yelled. What's the connection to the Soul Station dungeon? Lee, visibly rattled, began answering in a low, trembling voice. The Reaper Guild has only been trying to do its best in this chaotic world ever since the cataclysm 2 years ago. His body shook as he spoke, pretending to be overwhelmed. We supported the Hyena Guild because they have mostly D-rank hunters. They were quick and efficient at public service. As for the Soul Station, Lee continued, we believed it would be a perfect place for new hunters to gain experience. But now, after everything that's happened, his voice trailed off, filled with false regret. It's clear my actions weren't as good as I thought, otherwise we wouldn't be facing this disaster. The reporters were stunned, taken aback by his apparent sincerity. Then, to everyone's shock, Lee began to cry. If only I'd managed things better. No one should have lost their lives. His tears fell as he apologized profusely, walking slowly toward his car. The reporters, thoroughly convinced by his performance, began to express sympathy. They bought it. As Lee approached his car, his entire demeanor shifted in an instant. A wicked smirk tugged at his lips. Fools, he thought, pleased with himself. Lying is second nature to me. He continued to walk confidently, certain that no one had uncovered his true role. He was concerned earlier about why the Hunters Association let him go without much questioning, but then shrugged it off. No matter, he thought. They couldn't track the source of Stardust to me anyway. As he moved toward his car, Suho watched him from the shadows, silently observing. He asked Beru, who stood beside him, "Can you sense any Itarim from him?" Beru shook his head. "No, he's not controlled by Itarim like Brokey was." Suho narrowed his eyes. "Then we'll uncover the truth another way." He was about to make a move when Beru stopped him. "Don't act rashly, Suho," Beru warned. "I know how strong you are. I've seen the enemies you fought, but this time I'll stop you if I have to, even if it costs me my life." Suddenly, Lee paused mid-step, his body stiffening as his eyes flashed red. He turned around, scanning the area with a piercing glare, but after seeing nothing, he shrugged it off and continued toward his car. Beru turned to Suho. "The mana coming off of Lee, it's something else. It's far beyond anything I've felt before. He's on a whole different level." Suho clenched his fists, his jaw tight. Beru continued, his voice grave. "Lee Min-sung is no ordinary vice guildmaster. He's definitely an A-rank hunter, maybe even higher. We need to be cautious." Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for future updates. Share your thoughts in the comments below. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.